Hello? Anybody home?
Today, I want you to open your mind.
I've almost come to the conclusion that the story is so damning that the mass of people can't deal with it.
We are in process of developing a whole series of techniques to get people actually to love their servitude.
We face a hostile ideology, global in scope, atheistic in character, ruthless in purpose, and insidious in method.
For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
To change the minds and the attitudes and the beliefs of the people to bring about one world socialist totalitarian government.
The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists.
It has patterned itself after every dictator who has ever planted the ripping imprint of a boot on the pages of history since the beginning of time.
If you can get people to consent to the state of affairs in which they are living, then you have a much more easily controllable society than you would if you were relying wholly on clubs and firing squads and concentration camps.
Tools of conquest do not necessarily come with bombs and explosions and fallout. There are weapons that are simply thoughts, attitudes, prejudices.
As you connect the dots between different people, organizations, religions, history, suddenly the picture starts to form.
The kingdom of God is within man, not one man nor a group of men.
Someone born in the United States is not more special than someone born in Mexico. They're just vehicles for the consciousness to experience.
They do not want your children to be educated. They do not want you to think too much.
It was learned that the aliens had men and were then manipulating masses of people through secret societies, witchcraft, magic, the occult, and religion.
They reach into our children. Music, television, books.
Prey on children's innocence.
How can I disprove lies that are stamped with an official seal?
So if you have the opportunity to stand next to one of these machines, it feels like an altar to an alien god.
Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun.
The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc is now in the possession of the Army.
Too many others know what's happening out there. And no government agency has jurisdiction over the truth.
Any state, any entity, any ideology that fails to recognize the worth, the dignity, the rights of man, that state is obsolete. A case to be filed under M for Mankind in the Twilight Zone.
It's about time some of you got acquainted with the real hard truth.
If you don't connect the dots, it's just a mass of what's all this about.
Gable, rdgable at yahoo.com. If you would like to reach out to me directly, I don't have a team. I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. I've noticed that over the last couple of months, the show audience has grown quite substantially. And I wonder if part of the reason for that is because among all of the other sources of information, first of all, I don't consider myself really a source of information per se. I don't really consider myself news. I don't really consider myself any of those things. But what I do consider myself is someone who likes to analyze what's going on, what's happening. Someone who likes to look into things and ask questions. And that's something that, of course, gets a little bit mocked from time to time. Shouldn't ask your own questions. You should just listen to what the experts tell you. You should just listen to what the authorities tell you. And there is some benefit to that. I always joke about the CDC when they say you should wash your hands after you go to the bathroom. I think that you should probably wash your hands after you go to the bathroom. If the authorities tell you that maybe you should wait to cross the crosswalk and not jaywalk, I mean, it's probably for your own safety. There are certain things and there are certain rules in society that are beneficial. And I think that the idea that we shouldn't listen to any authority and the idea that we should almost have a kind of form of anarchy is like a natural byproduct of not trusting authority, not trusting rules because we want to be rebellious. And sometimes rebellion is a good thing. There needs to be a balance between rebellion and perhaps too much order, although too much order could be a good thing if society has, a moral compass and people agree to not steal from each other. And there's a lot of balancing acts that have to happen for those types of things to work out. Unfortunately, when you have a society that's all authoritarian and no morals and no values, then you get one of the worst forms of tyranny imaginable. And society tends to slip in and out of that tyranny generation after generation, century after century. That's all human history is. That and war and attempts to control large groups of people. And the same thing goes for religion. Religion is derived from the word religare, which means to bind. It's very similar to musubi here in Japan, which means to bind and unify. It's arguable kind of that it's the Japanese version of what the monotheistic God is in the Middle Eastern Western world. But, religare is the root of religion. The word religion, it means to bind, which is also really what, Islam and Judaism, they embody these concepts as well. As you've heard me talk about in the show before, Islam it comes from the word that means to submit to God, in the same way that Yisrael means to struggle with God, to submit to God, God's plan. So in the same way that authority is necessary to some extent, religion is also necessary to some extent. And I don't mean that in the sense that you need to pick a religion. I don't mean it that simply. I think that kind of literalism, unfortunately, can be, it is too often used to interpret what I'm saying on this show, and people unfortunately misunderstand my points. What I'm saying is the essence of religion, which is, again, order and structure and at least some moral value, ethics, something. And also it provides community and whatnot. And the show's not about religion tonight, but I'm just trying to compare the two things between the necessary elements of authority and the necessary elements of religion. And those two things obviously go together because oftentimes you have religious governmental systems or systems that rely heavily on religious iconography and talking points. And in the United States of America, we embrace religions. We embrace all religions. You can be anything that you want to be, and that also includes not being anything. You don't have to pick something. The government, ideally, idealistically, if we were to actually abide by the founding principles, the government should not be meddling in religious affairs, nor should, I guess that's more implied, that the government should not be telling you what you have to believe. But the government also, in regard to not meddling in religious affairs, should also not be telling you what you shouldn't believe. And they shouldn't be telling you that you have to pray to God, and they shouldn't be telling you that you can't pray to God. That's the point. That's what the First Amendment is all about. That's what this whole, quote, experiment in self-government is all about. And that includes every religion. It doesn't stop at one religion or another. It includes all religions. And the only exception to that in constitutional law, I think is generally agreed upon, is that it does not include Satanism, because Satanists, I mean, at least official, institutionalized Satanists, admit that they don't believe in these powers. So if you don't believe in supernatural powers, then you really aren't a religion. It's more of like a political cult, which is really what Satanism is. And so in constitutional law, having studied it myself, generally speaking, we would say that Satanism is not considered a religion. So all of these satanic temples and statues and all this legal debate over it's a religious, it's a religious freedom issue, or it is an issue of it's hate to not like those statues. Not really. It's because it's not really a religion. And the bottom line is simply this: the First Amendment guarantees religious freedom, and Congress, our government, can make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. It's pretty simple. It's pretty straightforward. It's the first line of the First Amendment: the establishment of religion or the prohibiting of the free exercise thereof, among other things like freedom of speech, which of course ties into religion, freedom of the press, which to some extent ties into the freedom of religion, or the right to peaceably assemble, which also ties into religion, and to, of course, petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's the founding pillar of our country. And you can argue that maybe we don't need these 10 amendments, because if government powers are not explicitly stated, then they don't have those powers. But we have the First Amendment and the other amendments not to restrain the public, but to restrain the government, and to remind the public that you do have these rights and the government cannot strip them away. That's the idea. That's the idea. So if I am confused as an American. I'm genuinely, I say it a lot because I am, but I'm really genuinely confused how there seems to be a variety of movements. Some of them are politically contrary to one another. Some of them are, I guess, just simply hypocritical, that advocate for the banning of one religion or another religion. In this current state of affairs that we find ourselves in, it's the current moment, it's primarily Islam. But there's also a move to do the same thing to Christianity. And that's where tonight's show title comes in. How many Catho-licks, L-I-C-K-S, does it take to get to the center of banning Christianity? Now, I'm not a Catholic. I didn't grow up a Catholic. I like Catholic iconography. I like the history of it. I don't particularly like the touching of the kids. I don't particularly like the abuse of power, but that comes with, I guess, all territory. It comes in the synagogues. It comes in the mosques. It comes in the halls of government anywhere in the world. But I'm not a Catholic. I want to say that up front. I do like Catholic iconography. I do think most of the churches are beautiful, but I'm not a Catholic. And that means that I certainly don't have a Catholic perspective, but I do see, and I've started to notice, and since I'm not a Catholic, I haven't really ever paid attention to it. I've started to notice that Catholicism is, I think, the first brick to be removed. It's the first little piece of the puzzle to be extracted. It's the first card to fall in an ongoing assault against Christianity. And for that matter, as most of you already know this, I know it pisses people off, but I like to be very clear in where I stand. I'm also not a Christian, although I grew up a Christian, a Baptist, so I have a Christian upbringing. I have sort of a Christian perspective. And although, of course, Catholicism is sort of unique and really niche in regard to the general large number of Christian denominations, which is I think it's tens of thousands. Catholicism still is Christianity. I mean, they might put more emphasis on the mother, but it is still considered Christianity. But let's call it let's call it low-hanging fruit, or let's call it the lowest common denominator. A lot of Christians, it doesn't matter what your denomination is, a lot of Christians don't like Catholics. I don't know how Catholics feel about other Christians, but I know that a lot of Christians in general don't like Catholics. Or at least they're neutral and just don't like maybe consider them Christian. I don't know if this goes for you, but I think it goes for, I mean, it probably goes for Methodists. It probably goes for Lutherans. It probably goes for Baptists. It probably goes for Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't know for sure. I'm pretty sure based on my experience in life that general Christians don't like Catholics. I don't know how much Catholics feel about other Christians. I think Catholics might embrace Christians to some extent, but I think Christians in general, they don't like Catholics. And I wonder if part of that's because clearly Catholicism is just the remnants of the Roman Empire, and clearly Catholicism, well, I would say clearly all Christianity, but clearly Catholicism is simply a merger of the early Christian cult for political, maybe even military, and spiritual, societal, cultural reasons, merging all of those things together with, quote, paganism, to blend the two together to stop the rioting and to stop the burning and to stop the persecution of non-Christians, which of course led to the persecution of Christians. There's the same issue with Jews. Like, Jews are just naturally attacked. No, they did stuff first that led to their attacking, and same thing with Christians. They also did stuff first that led to their persecution. But the point is, I don't know if Catholics feel that way about Christians, but I think a lot of Christians feel that way about Catholics. But see, this is the thing I've been warning about for a long time. I've been saying on this show that although I'm not a Christian, which I know is what turns most people off, and maybe I shouldn't say that, but I needed to be very clear that I'm not a Christian, and yet I'm approaching this from the standpoint of defending Christianity, because every time you allow a denomination, a sect, whatever it might be, within your own religion especially, to be assaulted, then you're allowing that assault to take place on your own faith, your own beliefs. In other words, to put it simply, if you allow Catholicism to be politically, spiritually, religiously, socially, culturally assaulted, and you might even cheer it on, oh, they worship the mother, they don't worship the Son of God. If you do that, you're actually setting the precedent to destroy your own freedoms, your own beliefs, your own faith. Now, obviously, when things are more distant, like when you've been conditioned for decades that Islam is the real enemy, they're the real threat, it's not as easy to see that trying to ban or arguing to ban or being an advocate of banning Islam in the United States, which is just simply a violation of the First Amendment, just plain and simple. It's not a religious statement. It's a political statement. It's simply a violation of the First Amendment. But I can see why it would be understandable that if some guy like myself is speaking, maybe you don't know much about me, and I say, hey, banning Islam is setting the precedent to ban Christianity, you're probably not going to worry so much, because I think most Christians assume that, well, Christianity is different. And the issue isn't over whether it's different or it's the same. The issue is over religious freedom. That's the issue. That's always been the issue. In fact, that's one of the primary reasons why the United States became the United States, was because of the lack of religious freedom, because of the Church of England, among other factors. So religion and the freedom of religion, the government can't mandate it, nor can they strip away your right to practice something. That's the fundamental basis by which the country is founded. In fact, not only is it the First Amendment, it comes before free speech. It comes before free press. It comes before the right to peaceably assemble. It comes before the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. It is the first thing. It's the first of the first of the first. It's number one, religious freedom, period. Of course, that does not apply to Satanism, but religious freedom. So if you argue that Islam can be banned, you're arguing for Christianity to be banned, or any religion to be banned for that matter. And the people that are driving this are almost overwhelmingly either bigoted Christians or Jews. Jews really hate Catholics, and Catholics really don't like Jews. And they've been at it for a long, long, long time. They've been at it for hundreds and hundreds of years. So it makes sense that Catholics would be the first sort of Christian domino to fall. Now, obviously, Christianity as a whole has been mocked and ridiculed and laughed at across the United States, not just the US, but around the world, but especially in the US. I'd say very strongly over the last 30-something years, especially over the last 15 to 20 years. And the reason for that is very, very clear. Most of it comes out of Hollywood. Most of it comes out of the media. And most of that is run by Jews who really don't like Jesus, who really don't like Christianity, with the exception of some Orthodox Jews and conservative ones, and exception of Messianic Jews. But Jews don't like Catholics. Catholics don't really necessarily like Jews, or at least we're talking institutional religious structures and political components of them. So if Catholicism is the first brick to be removed, it is the first system to be, directly targeted. What do you think is going to happen after that? Again, with the Muslim thing, I know that thing might sound very different and very separate. Like, well, they're Muslims. It's not Christianity. What does it matter? And you don't understand that banning that, or arguing to ban that, sets the precedent to ban all the denominations of your religion. Sets the precedent for a tyranny, and it eliminates the First Amendment. It just repeals it, essentially, at least socially repeals it. But within your own religion, you should understand that if Catholicism is targeted, then your whole religion, like every denomination of Christianity, is also being targeted. And if Catholics can be ostracized and driven out of the acceptable social, political arena, which it's not like it's going to happen overnight, it's the setting of like a precedent. In the same way that there were Muslims back in the 60s and 70s in Dearborn, Michigan, and nobody had any issues. There's never been an act of terrorism. Nobody even knew that unless they lived in Dearborn, that there were a bunch of Muslims there, which of course came from largely U.S. intervention in those other countries that those people came from. And then suddenly it became a big issue a couple of months ago when a Jewish guy pretending to be a Christian went to Dearborn and was an agent provocateur. And then even the locals in Dearborn were saying, this guy is not from here. He's a foreign agent. He doesn't belong here. And you saw Christians and Muslims getting together and saying, it's just not true what they say about the Muslims here. Another agent provocateur who's trying to infiltrate and trying to drive a wedge and create conflict in society, actively encouraging people, that's Jake Lang, to get rid of the Muslims. Could you imagine if someone was doing that? Get rid of the Christians, get rid of the Jews. There would be respectively, equally, pretty vast, intense responses to that, I'm sure, in various communities, or at least on a local level. I'm sure there'd be something federally done about it. But if it's Muslims, it's a different story. And they try to convince you that all the Muslims are taking over Congress. How many Muslims are in Congress? How many Christians are in Congress? How many Jews are in Congress? It's a far more greater number, much larger number than the number of Muslims. So the issue here is the First Amendment. I was talking to somebody yesterday, a friend of mine, and they were giving me some perspective on my show. And I was, I take that into consideration. A lot of what they were saying to me, I felt that I already did on this show in terms of presentation. And by the time I got to the end of the conversation, I had said to them, you can't control people's perception of how they see you. And if I'm sitting here and telling people, look, it's not, for me, it's not like an identity thing. I don't care about either side. I just don't want to kill 92 million Iranians. That's it. I don't want to kill 92 million Iranians, 92.4 million. It's not a statement of political affiliation. It's not a statement of religion. It's not a statement of anything except I don't want to kill 92 million people. That's it. And when I talk about Judaism, it's just a statement of I have a God-given right to open my mouth and say whatever I want to say. And if I say that I don't like Catholics, that's acceptable in our society. If I say I don't like Christians, that's acceptable in our society. If I say I don't like Muslims, that's applauded in our society. But if I say I don't like Jews, suddenly it's associated with, quote, hate speech and promoting violence, and you shouldn't be able to have that speech. That's a problem. If I can dislike Muslims openly and be applauded for it, but I can't dislike Jews and be applauded for it, or just dislike in general, then we don't have a free society. We have one that is controlled. We have one in which we police ourselves. Got to be careful. You don't get seen as an anti-Semite. I don't care what you see me as. I'm an American. I'm a constitutionalist. I'm a First Amendmentist. Freedom of religion. You are not going to compel me to practice, nor are you going to stop me from practicing. That's how it works. That goes for Judaism. It goes for Islam. It goes for Hinduism, because there's an assault on that too. People that don't know. I mean, if you thought you didn't know anything about Islam, or if you thought other people didn't know anything about Islam, they know even less about Hinduism. Because in Hinduism, it might look polytheistic. Ultimately, Hinduism is monotheistic, because all the different polytheistic elements of it are all extensions of one central monotheistic source. And they call it, just like in Catholicism, they call it the Trinity. They call it the Trimurti. It's a Trinity, which where do you think Catholics got that from? They got it from the Hindus. So we have a problem in the United States. And part of that problem is that we don't have, on average, any constitutional IQ, which is like not having an engine for your car. It's not going to go anywhere. We don't have fuel for the vehicle. We don't know, like we started the car and we don't have tires. This is the fundamental basis, the blueprint, the structure, the skeleton that gives it life. This is what the whole country was founded on, these principles. And if you're going to argue for the banning of Islam, you're arguing for the banning of Christianity. Now, why am I talking about this tonight, you might think? Why have I spent 25% of the show so far discussing this? Well, it's because of this Truth Social post from the President of the United States. Now, with the exception of the fact that we've covered Iran and we've covered Israel, and we've covered the kind of geopolitical nature of all of what's happening, and we've of course looked at from the very start, even before the war began, we've looked at the occult nature, the spiritual nature, the religious nature, the holy war nature, the eschatological nature, and all that. So the exception of all the stuff that we've done recently, we're not going to cover that again tonight, but we're looking at this statement, because when I read this, it's based on all that other stuff. It's based on, the Tucker Carlson, the Megyn Kellys, the Candace Owenses, the Alex Joneses, who are big supporters of the president, now saying that they don't support the president. He's gone mad, he's gone crazy, and so on. But when I read this, I thought, well, hold on a second. There's something interesting, maybe a little pattern here that maybe not, I don't know, but that others have maybe not picked up. Maybe they have, maybe they haven't. And what that thing is that I'm wondering if people have picked up is that I think you can say, with the exception of Alex Jones, although Alex Jones is also a guy who founded like a Catholic prayer app, not the same Alex Jones, not the, I read 200 naval history books and I used to get, ganged up on by 7 black guys in Austin, Texas. I broke their noses. Not that Alex Jones, a different Alex Jones. But Trump is obviously talking about the radio. Donald Trump's talking about the radio host, Alex Jones. So Alex Jones is maybe the exception, but Tucker Carlson's a Catholic. Megyn Kelly is a Catholic. Candace Owens is a Catholic. And these aren't just Catholics. That's just like it's like saying Tucker Carlson's a man, Megyn Kelly's a woman. I mean, like Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, Catholicism is their identity. And although Alex Jones is not a Catholic, Alex Jones is well known for being very Christian. And so when the president is attacking these people and saying they have low IQs, it signifies two things. It signifies, obviously, like this political shift, which I'm uninterested in discussing, but more so, it signifies this. It signifies the proof of what I've been talking about, the proof that what we've been discussing in the first 30 minutes tonight. It signifies and I see some people in the chat saying Tucker Carlson is not a Catholic. I thought he was a Catholic. Maybe he's not. Either way, these are all very prominent Christians. Is the point? In the same case with Alex Jones, maybe he's a Protestant, but these are prominent Christians. That's the important point here. But specifically, Candace Owens and Megyn Kelly are big Catholics. But the Christians here, this is the issue, because clearly what is driving the president is Jewish supremacy, and he's himself not a Christian. And Jewish supremacists wrote this. I don't think the president even wrote this, targeting people who are outspoken Christians, outspoken Catholics. And although not listed on this particular list, you'll probably remember, because it was such a big story, Carrie Prejean Bowler, a very prominent Catholic who was part of the White House's Religious Liberty Commission. And remember that she was fired from her job because she doesn't support Israel. She doesn't support Jewish supremacy. And so the White House fired this Catholic. And reportedly, the president didn't want to do that, but he was forced to do that. It's unbelievable that the president doesn't have the authority to. It's as if the Religious Liberty Commission is some kind of like important, significant, giant organization, like it's the CIA or something. It's not. And yet the president has no power to let the woman keep her job. Who's running the country? Christianity, Catholicism. I'm making the distinction that these things are separate because that's what some people believe, but ultimately it's all part of the same entity, the same structure. And clearly it's all a threat, whether it's Eastern Orthodox, Baptist, Lutheran, Pentecostal, Presbyterian, whatever, Catholic. It's all considered an enemy of the people that run the country. And it's not just that it's an enemy, it's the enemy. It's the one of the oldest enemies of the people that run our country. And when Christians feel that they're being attacked, rightfully so, you're right, you are being attacked. The problem is I think most of Christians think that who's attacking them are Muslims. The Muslims are not attacking you because you're Christian. The Muslims agree with Christianity. They love Jesus. And anytime you might see a, quote, Muslim attack a Christian, it's probably not because they're a Christian, in the same way that when you see conflicts anywhere in the world, you could break everything down to, to whatever identity the person has and say, it's like with race crime in the United States. It's black on white, white on black. If they attacked them because they were black or they attacked them because they were white, I'd say in most cases it's because maybe they were looking for a fix and they robbed somebody, or maybe it's usually not motivated by religion. And these things are really hard to identify, whether or not somebody's motivated by like a religious or a racial hatred. Most of that stuff is totally manufactured. The point is, just like with the First Amendment, a crime is a crime. Robbery is robbery. You want to break it down among religious identities, fine, if you want to look at the pixels, but a crime is a crime. A violation of the First Amendment is a violation of the First Amendment. It's just that simple. And that's where I'm coming from if it's not clear. That's where I'm coming from. If it's not crystal clear, that's what I'm saying. So whether you're Christian, Catholic, or quite frankly, even if you're an atheist, this should still be concerning. Because let's say you're an atheist, you don't have, I don't know exactly what all atheists think, but I'm pretty sure that atheists, they don't believe in God and we're all worm food. I think that's an oversimplification, but let's just say you're an atheist. Okay, you're an atheist. You don't believe in God. Well, again, look at the First Amendment. Let's say that this first line, you don't think that necessarily applies to you. It does apply to you because you're an atheist. But what happens if we were to have a theocracy? If our country was a theocracy, you would be forced to practice that religion. So even if you're an atheist, the First Amendment still applies to you. you're still going to want to write this down. You're still going to want to make a note of this. The reason is because this isn't just an example. This is actually happening in our country. People like Nick Fuentes, people like Pete Hegseth, and many others, including the Candace Owens and the Megyn Kellys and the Alex Joneses and the Tucker Carlsons. I wouldn't say Tucker Carlson is advocating for this, but the Christian angle of the saviors of the republic has driven extremists like Nick Fuentes, who's like, we just need to have a Catholic theocracy. We just need to have a religious theocracy, which is also what J.D. Vance is pushing. So this is happening, whether you like it or not. And if you're an atheist and you think this doesn't apply to me, you're wrong. It does apply to you. It does. And in fact, the fact that you don't have to practice a religion, you can be an atheist, might make you think that the First Amendment doesn't really matter, when in fact it is the fundamental thing that does matter. Because if we were to establish a theocracy, guess what you're going to have to do? Practice that religion, at least outwardly, or something bad might happen to you. So this applies to everybody. And it specifically applies, in terms of our example tonight, it applies to Catholics. Because if Christians, I don't think all Christians believe this, but if Christians across the board generally agree that Catholicism is not Christianity and we should do something about it, that's a problem. It's more so a problem for you, but it affects everybody else too. I think that point is very, very, very clear. So let's keep that in mind. Let's keep that in mind tonight as we proceed through the show. How many Catholics does it take to get to the center of banning Christianity? In the simplest terms, how many people are you going to allow to be disappeared, mocked, ridiculed, and put in jail because they don't have your faith, your interpretation? They don't subscribe to your denomination of what is called Christianity. And eventually, they will come for you. Now, that brings me to a very famous, I would say infamous in some ways, and also misrepresented and often misquoted statement from the Lutheran pastor, Martin Niemöller. Martin Niemöller first had said, this is the quote, there are other versions of it. This is the quote, though. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Now, this quote and the variations of it, which I'm very sure usually include Catholicism. In fact, it even states that on the Encyclopedia of the Holocaust. Some printed versions of the quote include Protestants and Catholics on the list of victims. But that quote is important, and it's also in Holocaust museums. It's important for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's important because it says right there that they, which is the evil Nazis, didn't actually come for the Jews first. So this kind of destroys the whole 1930s narrative just in and of itself. But the point is, in reading this, the concept is still valid, right? The concept is still important here. The concept is still, we just apply it to Christians. First, they came for the Catholics. I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Catholic. Then they came for the whatever the next denomination is, the Baptists. I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Baptist. Then they came for me, and there wasn't anybody left to speak up for me. That's just a general. It's just a general theme of history. We don't care if something happens to our neighbor because they don't believe the same thing. No one's going to come for me. I didn't say anything. I didn't do anything, which is the point. You're a blank slate. You can be painted in any way, shape, or form by the people in power that are on a power trip, that are psychotic. They want to claim that you've done something, whether you have or not, and there'll be an excuse, a reason for why you get taken next. So although this is just sheer propaganda, it's pro-Jewish propaganda, it's anti-German propaganda. Nevertheless, this statement, this quote, whatever it actually was, is very, very relevant. It's also ironic, considering that if anybody was targeting Christians, it was the Bolsheviks. If anybody was targeting Christians, it was the Soviets. It was the Jewish leadership. They literally blew up a church and tried to build the Tower of Babel on it. Did you see that? The Grand Soviet Palace was modeled after the Tower of Babel, and they were going to build it on the ashes of a holy site. If you want to learn more about that, you can read my book, Protocols of Goyim. So there's irony in this. There's also a little bit of, the historical narrative isn't reinforced by this because they didn't come for the Jews first, according to this quote. But most importantly, just the essence of this is what we're looking for. And the essence is, if the Catholics and other prominent Christians are being targeted, you're next. So you might want to pay attention. You might want to watch out. Now, this might sound like we're going to shift gears. We're not. I want to listen to this clip of Randy Fine. For those of you who don't know Randy Fine is a slob who is a, quote, representative for the people of Florida, my home state. And Randy Fine, the slob, is an advocate of genocide. And he's an advocate not just of genocide of like one group of people. He's an advocate of genocide against all people who are not Jewish. And Randy Fine, among other disgusting things that he has said, is advocating for the genocide of the Lebanese people. Now, of course, they don't call it genocide. They don't call it ethnic cleansing. Randy Fine calls it Hezbollah. Take a listen to this.
Right on the screen here, we have a live look of Beirut, Lebanon. And of course, attacks have continued there. Yesterday was the deadliest day in attacks that we've seen in the latest Israel-Hezbollah war. You're one of the few Jewish members of Congress, staunch supporter of Israel, its right to defend itself, of course. Do you support their continued deadly strikes on Lebanon and their argument that the ceasefire doesn't apply there? And do you think it risks a fracture with the White House during this war?
There's a lot of questions there. The key question is, does it risk a fracture with the White House? I would say no. The president has been very clear. The ceasefire with Iran did not include Hezbollah. So no, I don't think it fractures that at all. But Israel is not attacking Lebanon. Israel is attacking Hezbollah. And Lebanon had an obligation to deal with Hezbollah, to control them and to stop them from firing rockets at Israel, which, by the way, includes 700,000 Americans. Lebanon has failed to do that. Hezbollah has failed to disarm. And so Israel is doing what is necessary to not only protect Israelis, but the Americans who live there.
What an incredible, you really do have to give them a round of applause. What an incredible inversion of reality. We're not just protecting Israelis. We're actually protecting Americans by bombing Lebanon. Lebanon, of course, was part of the ceasefire, which now doesn't exist, according to the man who negotiated it, Pakistani prime minister. That doesn't matter, though, because they're not bombing Lebanon. They're bombing Hezbollah. It's like they weren't bombing Palestinians. They were bombing Hamas. If I was Iran, I would just say, we're not bombing Israel. We're bombing terrorists. We're not bombing schools and hospitals and children. We're bombing terrorists. Apparently, that's as simple as it is. And people will believe that. But this statement is also contradictory to the fact that the Israelis bombed Lebanon like this back in, the 80s? And I don't think Hezbollah was even around in the 80s. So I'm confused, as I normally am on this show. More to the point, though, just like in all other parts of the Middle East, most people in America have been convinced, or they've been taught that they've been taught that the Christian religion is not accepted anywhere in the Middle East. And that's just fundamentally incorrect. And they've been taught that by Jewish propaganda. They've been taught that by Jews that run the media. They've been taught that by, I would think to some extent, even Christians who are brainwashed by that same media, but push those narratives and talking points because it's to the benefit of Israel, which is what they think they have to support. If you were to look at Syria, Syria had one of the, I don't know if we would call it the, I don't think you could quantify it, but they had one of the most welcoming countries for religious freedom. That was until we got rid of Bashar al-Assad. Well, that was before we've attempted to overthrow their government for quite some time. In Iraq, Afghanistan as well, Christians were, relatively welcomed and accepted. The Christian population of Lebanon is upwards of a third. It's roughly 30 or more. It might even be up to 40%. So it's not just that they're bombing Lebanon. Randy Fine says they're bombing Hezbollah. Okay, well, they're not just bombing Hezbollah, they're bombing Christians. 3 out of 10 people are Christians in Lebanon. That's a lot of Christians. If you look at Iran, I mean, they have a metro station dedicated to the Virgin Mary and dedicated to Jesus. They have the largest Jewish population outside of Israel, and they have a large number of Christians that live in Iran. And yet, that just conveniently gets left out of the equation because it doesn't fit the narrative. The narrative is just simply there's a Jewish state, and then there's just a bunch of Muslim states, and then that's pretty much it. And we have to kill the Muslims because they're a threat to the Jews, even though there are tons of Jews in those so-called Muslim countries like Iran, where the Jews, Christians, and Muslims get along. In fact, there's Muslim and Christian and Jewish, individuals that are in or have been in the Iranian government. Here is that metro station in Iran. You won't see stuff like this in Israel that isn't covered in rubble and blood and body parts. But they have it in Iran. So if you're talking about assaulting Islam, like just such a vile hatred, you've got to kill all the Muslims, Hezbollah, Hamas, even though Israel's behind most of that as well. Well, you're also advocating for the destruction of Christians. That's what this is. 3 out of 10 are Christian. So if you're advocating for the bombing of Lebanon, you're advocating for the murdering of Christians. And it's the same thing in any other country in the region. There's a lot of Christians. I didn't know that. I would have, if someone would have said that to me 15 years ago, I would not have believed them. And then you look into it. And you look there are some places like in Iraq, it depends on where you're at in Iraq. Some parts of Iraq, they have preferential treatment for Muslims, but Christians are not persecuted. They're allowed to live and go about their lives. And for anybody who says, and it's a valid argument, well, you can find, they say, well, we can find examples where Christians are persecuted in these Muslim countries. Okay, well, we can find more examples in the U.S. where Muslims are persecuted, Christians are persecuted, and everybody else is persecuted by radical zealots all throughout American history. It's no different here than it is there. We give preferential treatment to some people. We give preferential treatment to Jews. We give preferential treatment to, depending on where you are in the country, sometimes to Muslims. That's usually to make Christians and Americans who are, quote, patriotic, freak out. Oh, the Muslims, they're coming in, they're getting preferential treatment. It's a ruse. It's a game. Randy Fine says, we're not bombing Lebanon. We're actually they're bombing Christians. It's the same Randy Fine who said, if they force us to choose, the choice between dogs and Muslims is not a difficult one. And Randy Fine explained on TMZ, which is another Jewish-run network, he explained on TMZ what he meant by that, what he meant by these Muslims and these dogs. Let's take a listen to that.
Or a lot of people, that's saying Muslims are worse than dogs.
That's not what it says. And again, I think you need to provide the context. I'll provide the context.
Okay.
One of Mayor Mondami's key advisors, Muslim advisors in New York, said dogs are not clean. They should be banned as indoor pets because Muslims coming to New York believe they violate their religion, finally Islam is coming to New York City. My point was a very clear one. If you're going to make me choose between my dog and people who want to come to this country and say for them to live here, we must ban dogs, the choice is an easy one. And I would put this back on you. I believe that's a view that 90% of Americans agree. Do you believe if immigrants want to come to this country and they don't want dogs, would you all give up your own dogs in order to make them happy?
You didn't say immigrants, you said Muslims. There are plenty of...
TMZ is obviously a joke, but more to the point, I've known many Muslims in my life who have dogs. So I'm not sure what Randy Fine's talking about, as always, because it works like this. You create some, Americans on average, they love dogs, man's best friend. Personally, I'm not a dog person, but Americans love dogs on average. So you take something like, puppy dogs, and you say the Muslims want to ban them. What proof do you have of that? Some Muslim advisor to Mamdani. Okay, who is that? What did they actually say? Why did they actually say it? Are they actually Muslim? Because the last time I checked, most of Mamdani's staff are actually Jewish. So in other words, you pick a topic that most Americans are going to feel, an emotional connection to. There's dogs, and we love dogs and puppy dogs and kitty cats. Okay. Then you have some agent, some radical extremist who says we should ban the dogs. It's not like it's not realistic. It's not even possible. But they say it. And that's all the public needs to hear. And then you have Randy Fine, who goes on television, and he is given on a Jewish network, seemingly being confronted over the issue. He's not really being confronted. It's all just part of the production. This is Hollywood-esque. It's quite literally, TMZ is Hollywood. It's quite literally Hollywood. And then Randy Fine sits there and says, well, it's not really, and he posted this, of course, on social media too. The choice between dogs and Muslims is not a difficult one. And then he explains why, well, what I really meant by that is that if you want me to choose over having a dog, because don't you love dogs? And having Muslims in my community, I'm picking the dogs. So it's underhanded, and it's also actually quite sophisticated propaganda because the public has no idea. I'm sure that the general public thinks Muslims don't like dogs. I don't know if I've ever talked to a Muslim who doesn't like dogs. I don't think that. Again, it's just like something that it's not real. It doesn't exist. Now, in terms of dogs being dirty, I'm not a Muslim. I'd agree with that. I don't particularly like dogs. I wouldn't eat them, but I don't particularly like dogs. I don't particularly like animals. I think most animals are dirty. There are rare occasions where people take care of their pets and it's not dirty. A lot of it comes down to the owner, if we're being honest. But obviously a lot of it has to do with, I think, values in society. But I wouldn't have an animal myself because I think that they're dirty. I wouldn't advocate for you not to have an animal unless that means that, your dog's going to poop on my lawn and I'm going to smell the urine through the walls, which I've lived next to people. I lived next to someone in New York, in Rochester, who had so many cats. You could literally smell the cat piss through the walls. It was awful. So like that I have an issue with, but I don't like dogs. Doesn't make me a Muslim, and there's plenty of Muslims who like dogs. It's just it's a made up thing. It's totally fictitious, and it's a Jewish representative who's an agent of Israel on a Jewish network telling you that this is what the Muslims believe, and we got to get rid of these Muslims. I don't really think it could be much clearer. Let's go to another TMZ clip. This is TMZ interviewing Dan Bilzerian. Now, I know that some people like Dan Bilzerian, and I frankly think that I could probably have a good conversation with him. I say that not because I'm going to interview him or talk to him. I don't think he'd ever talk to me, but just because, if I did, I think I could probably have a good conversation with him. However, I am suspicious of Dan Bilzerian. I don't think that he necessarily is like an agent per se. Maybe he is. I don't know. But I get the feeling that he, just like Sneeko and Caligula, whatever his name is that loser bro, and a bunch of these other Nick Fuentes types, I get the feeling that these people are allowed to do and say what they say and do, like Andrew Tate, and they get promoted, one, because of money, but two, because of just like the low IQ of most of these people. I don't think Nick Fuentes is low IQ. I don't necessarily think Dan Bilzerian is low IQ, but I'm just like the general theme of how they speak. It's really unintellectual. And so I think that is appealing to the public as much as, you know, the money factors into it. But the algorithm allows these people to become popular because when you listen to Dan Bilzerian or you listen to Stu Peters or you listen to Nick Fuentes, what do they sound like? They sound like angry bigots. Well, Nick Fuentes isn't really white, but you know, they paint them as white, like white supremacist angry bigots. And it's always the white person who's actually Jewish who sits there, stands there and calls them out on it to create more racial division. But it makes people like myself look like a bigot. Because when I write a book, Protocols of Goyim, that gets associated with the Nick Fuenteses, who I can't stand. It gets associated with the Stu Peters, who I kind of respect, kind of don't respect. It gets associated with the Dan Bilzerians. I think it's all part of the same production. So here's Dan Bilzerian on TMZ. This is what TMZ asked Dan Bilzerian, and this is how Dan Bilzerian responded in relation to something that he had said about Randy Fine, who, as you can see, as you can hear, is a Class A piece of subhuman garbage, who has posted things like, in Gaza, we should turn it to glass. Here's Randy Fine's X posts, just a couple. Palestine or Palestinian is just another word for demon. Guess the ceasefire is over and Hamas wants more Palestinian babies to die. Literally foaming at the mouth for the slaughtering of children. That Randy Fine. What did Dan Bilzerian say about Randy Fine that was so awful? What did he say that was just so terrible that we have to do an entire interview? The majority of the interview was about this. A little over half the interview, I think, was about this question.
You called your opponent this fat Jew.
Dan Bilzerian is running against Randy Fine for Congress.
You called your opponent this fat Jew. So he's not from Israel, but you called a guy in Florida this fat Jew. How is that not anti-Semitic?
Well, he's a Jewish supremacist, and he puts Israel before America, and I think that he should be tried for treason.
This fat Jew is anti-Semitic.
Yes, Dan. I mean that's what you say, but how about that's what I
know. I don't say it. I know he literally talks about how Muslims are lower than dogs. So is that Islamophobic?
Yes, it is, and that wouldn't be that's not appropriate for him to say either. If he had said that.
But he does all the time, and he tweets that, and he's a senator.
Are you anti-Semitic?
No, I'm not anti-Semitic. I think that, that's kind of a made-up term. I think the Palestinians are the real Semites. Term? Yes, because if you look at what a Semite
was
is.
Was Hitler anti-Semitic?
What's that?
Was Hitler anti-Semitic?
Like I said, it's the term is focused solely on Jews, but actual Semites are the Arabs, and Palestinians are Semites as well, and they actually have more DNA lineage to that region than any of the Eastern European Ashkenazi Jews that have taken it from them. So I kind of have issue with that term and how it's been hijacked to only talk about Jews.
So if you want to call it anti-Jewish, then you can call it anti-Jewish.
Well, I'm not going to call this anti-Jewish. When you say that this fat Jew, you could take another race and you could use another epithet, but you're anti-Semitic, Dan.
I'm not. I have Jewish friends.
Oh, some of your best friends are Jewish?
All Jews with one brush, but he paints all Muslims with one brush, and it's accepted. And for some reason in this country, it is okay to just blast Muslims, bash them. You look at what Bill Maher said about Muslims. I mean, it's this double standard, and I don't like the double standard. And I look at him as a Jewish supremacist. He believes that, you know, Jews are better than other people, and he puts Israel before America. And
so if you've got a black friend that you don't like, do you use the N-word on him?
No, I don't.
Then what's the difference when you use the word fat Jew for a Jew you don't like?
Well, is Jew the same as because that is not that's not, one is a slur, right? And one is describing a religion. So you can't compare the two.
Really?
You know,
there's a way
how can you compare those two?
There's a way you say it, Dan, that the intent is the same. It's
not the same at all.
So
one is a slur, one is a racial slur that I don't use, and the other one is describing an ethnicity.
You just used it.
Well, are we adults? Can we talk about a word? Was a word so offensive that that it just, you know, you can't say it? We have to say
the answer to that is yes. So I want to ask a question.
People are too.
Obviously, TMZ is garbage. So I don't put any value in this interview any more than I do with the Randy Fine interview, because although it appeared that they were really grilling Dan Bilzerian, it also appeared that they were kind of grilling Randy Fine, to be objective. I don't have any kind of faith in people like Dan Bilzerian. I'll admit that it's nice that we're having this conversation and Dan Bilzerian is saying things that I would say. Like when I was listening to this, I was taking a walk and I had this in my headphones, and I heard them say, well, you know, the N-word's the same as the, saying fat Jew. And I said to myself, I was like, well, that's not the same. One is a racial slur, and also a word of camaraderie amongst blacks and some whites, I suppose, as well. And the other one is the description of someone who's fat and who's Jewish. And then to say that, well, it's anti-Jewish then. It's kind of ironic because that is actually the original term. And it was changed to anti-Semitic because most of the people that were being accused of being, Jewish weren't actually Jewish. And so people were pointing out, you're not Jewish, so I'm not really anti-Jewish. So they had to make it Semitic, and it's more esoteric. Nobody knows what Semitic means. So they've changed the terminology. By the way, the word racism was also not invented, but developed by Jews to drive division between whites and blacks. The term homophobia was also coined by a Jew to drive division between heterosexuals and, quote, homosexuals. You want to learn about all of this, you can learn about it in my book, Protocols of Goyim, tstradio.info. The links are below. However you're listening to the show, or just go to the website, click on the book section. And besides, as I see most people in the chat pointing out, Semitic is a language. And it's actually kind of shocking that we live in a world where you can get the definition of the word from the dictionary. And although, words can be changed, this word has not been changed yet. And despite that, this is just genuinely, or say generally, ignored by the public, like the definition of the word. It's Arabic. That's what to speak a Semitic language is what it means to be a Semite. If I learn Hebrew, I become a Semite. I don't have to have any genetic connection to Jews or Israel. I just become a Semite because I've learned the language. It's something that you speak. It includes Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic, and certain other languages like Phoenician, Akkadian, constituting the main subgroup of the Afro-Asiatic family. So it's people who speak Semitic languages, Hebrew and Arabic especially. So if you're Jewish and you speak Hebrew, you're a Semite. If you're Jewish and you don't speak Hebrew, then you're not even if you are, quote, Jewish by some genetic determination, you don't speak Hebrew, then you're not a Semite. And if you're an Arab, you speak Arabic, you're not a Muslim, you're not religious at all, then you're still a Semite. So I'm glad that that conversation is being had. On the other hand, I'm suspicious of it because what it feels like is there's a retreat happening on the battlefield, and we're being given these heroes like, oh, look, it's Dan Bilzerian. I can trust him. I don't know if I trust Dan Bilzerian. I don't know if I trust any of the prominent voices who are speaking about these controversial issues and are willing to play this game with Jewish networks like TMZ. I mean, I guess I get it. You're running for Congress. You're running against Randy Fine. They had Randy Fine on. They have you on. Very few other people are going to do that. But, you know, for Jews like Jerry Springer, it's all just like this vulgar production. It's all just a big, you know, show of the N word and anti-Semitism and, you know, the R word and the C word and just the vulgarity. That's all they push. That's all they seem to be able to do. You know, they seem especially selected by God to fulfill this purpose. So I don't really put any kind of faith in Dan Bilzerian. And I think the central reason when I think about, well, I mean, he's saying what I say, why don't I trust him? I think it's because if you're running for Congress, it shouldn't be because you're attacking some fat Jew. It should be because I have better ideas. I am a moral person. I follow the law. I understand the law, and I'm going to run for Congress because the person who's in Congress, yeah, sure, they're supporting a foreign country. That should be brought up. But I have better ideas than Randy Fine. And I can debate Randy Fine, and I can defeat Randy Fine. That should be what matters. In the same way when you know, people talk about there's got to be a revolution. Well, look, like I said on the show on, I believe it was Wednesday or Thursday, if we had a, quote, revolution, like a violent, bloody revolution to water the tree of liberty with the blood of tyrants, what does that result in? When you have a general public who elect people perceptually like Joe Biden or Donald Trump, that's evidence of how the general public thinks. Slow, dementia, and insane. If you have a general public that isn't moral and doesn't really have values and isn't really respectful, it doesn't matter if you're speaking the way that, you know, quite frankly, the way that needs to be spoken. Like what Dan Bilzerian is saying, it needs to be said, and it needs to be said to a large audience because it's true. But maybe Dan Bilzerian has really great ideas. I'm just saying, like, the issue here isn't that Randy Fine is a fat Jew because he is a fat Jew. The issue here is he's a traitor. But the issue here is, does Dan Bilzerian have good ideas? And this is what I've been scared of. This is what I've been telling you on this show for years. The pendulum swings back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. This is clockwork. It lulls people to sleep because it's so consistent. It's like the waves crashing on the shore. And at some point, as I've said on this show over and over and over again, at some point, somebody who has my view there's going to be more than one, is going to become popular, is going to be elected to government. And if the reason that they're being elected to government is because they called Randy Fine a fat Jew, because he is a fat, disgusting Jew, then that's wrong. The reason that we should elect Dan Bilzerian is if he has good ideas that are better than the fat Jew. If the fat Jew wasn't a traitor and he was just a fat guy who also was Jewish, I wouldn't care. The fact that he's a traitor, the fact that he's committed treason as far as I'm concerned, the fact that he's a lying, no good scumbag, that's the reason that he shouldn't be in Congress. And let's not forget this as Americans. That is the central issue here. Again, he's a fat, disgusting, repulsive Jew, but that's not why he shouldn't be in Congress. He shouldn't be in Congress because he's a traitor. He shouldn't be in Congress because he's a liar and a scumbag. He's corrupt. That's why. And Dan Bilzerian also shouldn't be in Congress just because he called the guy a fat Jew. He should be in Congress if he has better ideas. That's why he should be in Congress. This goes back to the central issue of the First Amendment. Whether you're an atheist and you think it doesn't apply to you, which it does, good luck dealing with a theocracy. Or you're a Christian who thinks, well, I'm not Catholic, so if the Catholics are targeted, if the president is going to trash Catholics like Megyn Kelly and Candace Owens and people like Tucker Carlson, I think someone said he's a what did you say in the chat? He's a I don't know what he is. He's I guess not Catholic, but he's some other denomination of Christianity. But he gives Catholics a platform. Or Alex Jones is not Catholic, of course, but he's very, 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 very outspoken as a Christian. When you're targeting these people, and specifically the movement like this Catholic movement that is happening in the United States, when you're targeting those people, the issue should not be, well, they're Catholic, so it doesn't matter. I'm Christian. I believe in the real Jesus, and even though they're kind of Christian, they're not my Christians. So if they come for them, that's fine. I don't need to worry about that. No, you do need to worry about it. As much as the atheists need to worry about the First Amendment, Christians need to worry about what's happening to other denominations, even if they don't agree with them. You need to worry about Catholics, because if the Catholics are targeted, you're targeted. And for that matter, if the Muslims are targeted, you're targeted. Now, you'll notice that within all of this, there's arguments to ban Islam. There's arguments to ban sects of, or just outright the mocking of Christianity, but to ban forms of Christianity. But there's no argument to ban Judaism. In fact, there is, on the other hand, an argument and laws put in place to not only defend Judaism, but to essentially position Judaism as the central, energy source of the whole country. Everything should be focused on whether or not Jews are happy, whether Jews feel slighted. Jews deserve special protections. So we can attack Muslims, we can attack Catholics, we can mock Christians, but not the Jews. And if you can do all of those things, just objectively speaking, not motivated by religion or hate or anti-Semitism, whatever other word you want to use to ignore the initial point that I made and the whole basis of tonight's show, objectively speaking, if you can mock Christians and mock Muslims, and you can say the Christians worship some dead guy on a cross, and the Muslims worship, some pedophile prophet, and they have sex with goats, and the Christians have a pedophile problem in most of their churches, from Baptists to Catholics, then you should be able to say the same thing about Jews. And if you can't say it without repercussions, then guess what? You're not living in a free society. You're not living in America. You're living in an occupied state, occupied by both a foreign government and a very, very foreign to all human civilization religious ideology, which is more about the self-centered, arrogant, egotistic, absolutely psychotic, unhinged Jews who have no regard whatsoever for human life because they consider those other people to be cattle. That is the reason. That is the whole basis for why I do what I do and I say what I say. Because you know what? I think that the Jews are having sex with goats. I think that the Jews are repulsive. I think that the Jews should not be in America anymore. I think that the Jews should be banned from the United States. I think they should be rounded up, and I think they should be deported. It's okay if Randy Fine says that about Muslims. It's okay if Laura Loomer says that about Muslims. I think every Jew in the United States of America should have their holy books confiscated and burned. I think that their synagogues should be shut down, just like they shut down churches during COVID. I think that the Jews should be rounded up, and I think that they should be deported from the United States. And they should be deported to Israel or whatever other country will take them. How about Madagascar? Problem solved. If that is offensive to you, if that bothers you, if you're willing to cut that clip up and send it to the police or send it to networks and accuse me of all these horrible things, not only are you the problem, whether you realize it or not, you're anti-American. Because if people can advocate for the same thing happening to Muslims, or to Christians for that matter, then I should be able to advocate for the same thing happening to Jews. And if I can't advocate for that, but I can advocate for the destruction of Islam and the banning of Islam and the removal of Islam and Muslims from the United States, then we do not live in a free society. That's the test. We don't live in a free society. We do not have free speech. And we certainly, if that's the case, do not have a First Amendment. And when you realize that, then the whole thing starts to unravel and unfold. Because if we don't have a First Amendment, that means we don't have a right to practice our religion. That means we can just ban them. And we can give preferential treatment to other religions. It means that you can't speak freely. You don't have a right to speak freely. You don't have a right to speak your mind. People like Randy Fine, that fat Jew slob, are going to decide what you can and cannot say. He's going to decide whether you go to jail for speech. He's going to decide whether or not your Bible is banned, or your Quran is banned, or your Bhagavad Gita is banned, or the Upanishads, or whatever it might be. He's going to make sure that all of that's banned. And why do you think all of these religions are targeted? Because they're all not Jewish. And despite the fact that Muslims overwhelmingly accept Christians, Christians don't accept Muslims. Why do you think that is? For the same reason the Jews don't accept Muslims. They see them as an enemy, but specifically the Christians don't accept Muslims because they've been brainwashed by the Jews, who have to brainwash the Christians in order to defend themselves against what is an overwhelming number of opponents. So here's an important thing to think about. Christians often believe, I know this because I've heard it my entire life, they often think that when they're insulted or when someone points out a contradiction, that they're being persecuted. And that persecution, which usually is not persecution, it's just criticism or jokes, but that persecution, as they interpret it, is proof that their religion is true, that their faith is, whatever that means. Like, I don't still frankly know what it means, but like the literalisms of their beliefs are real. But that's not what it means. If someone is pointing out hypocrisy, it's just hypocrisy. If someone's pointing out double standards, it's double standards. It doesn't mean that what you believe is literally true. They get this, I think, in large part from the Jews. They get the same idea. In fact, the Jews used to threaten with or actually murder people who got access to their holy books. The Torah is off limits to non-Jews. And the Jews used to, if you attempted to infiltrate their societies, they would execute you. That was the policy of the rabbis. For the Christians, they initially gained so much popularity and notoriety, not because they welcomed in criminals who the pagan gods had rejected and condemned, which is very telling and interesting about, quote, paganism, but the church also said, look, everybody can be saved, which was one of the best positive teachings of Jesus. You don't need the Pharisees. You don't need the institutions, which is why the Jews hate him to this day, because they don't need your authority. We don't need your authority. And over time, the Christians and the church went from, you can convert if you'd like, it's cool, we got refreshments, or something to that equivalent. It went from that to convert or die. Now, that's not to say the Muslims haven't done that. The Muslims have done that. But what I'm saying is the Christians in particular, they derived that radicalism, I think, in large part from the Jewish communities that were the launch pad for Christianity. If we cannot make these observations, if we cannot point out historical facts, if we cannot make observations about contemporary events, we don't live in a free society. Because here's the bottom line. I don't have to be subscribed to a religion. I'm not a Christian. I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a Jew, although if you read the book of Romans, I guess technically we're all Jews spiritually. I'm not any of those things. And yeah, sure, I say I practice Shinto, but Shinto's not a religion. It's just like a ritual that you do every day. So that would mean, for a lot of people that I'm an atheist, but I do believe in God. What God? Well, it's not your God. It's not anybody else's God. It's not even really a concept of God. God is just he who shall not be named. There's no way to identify it. There is something more than nothing. I think, this is proof that there's something more than nothing. Illusory or not, something animates it. So there's something. So I'm not an atheist. I don't have an identity. But, simultaneously, I'm willing to defend all religions. Why? Because of the First Amendment, because of the founding principles of the country. Because if I'm religious about anything, it's about the Constitution. If I'm religious about anything, it's about what that document, like philosophically, like fundamentally, what it means and what it means for all humans on planet Earth. It's really, really important. You don't write that if you're not a moral, decent person. And people say, well, they weren't moral. They owned slaves. Well, actually, born into slavery, owning slaves, being given a lot of wealth, inheritance, and yet risking it all to be tried for treason and hanged and have your entrails cut out, risking it all, and then eventually actually letting your so-called slaves go. That sounds like an exception to the historical rule. That's what made our country so great in the first place. So one of the things that made it so great in the first place. So I think it's important to note all of this. Fat Jews like Randy Fine are the problem, but they're also not the problem. If he was a fat Jew and he said, we don't support this war for Israel and we don't support the elimination of free speech, even when people call me a fat Jew, I'd support Randy Fine. I don't support Randy Fine because Randy Fine is a fat, repulsive, disgusting, lying scumbag and a Jew. Well, I'm sorry, he's not a fat Jew. He's an obese, repulsive Jew. And all the things that implies. That's why I don't like Randy Fine, because he wants to censor your speech and your right to protest, things that apparently you can't do in the state of Florida anymore if they involve Israel. The state of freedom during COVID has now become the state of tyranny because, well, Israel controls the state of Florida. I'm really glad now that I did not move back there when I had the option. That's why. That's why Randy Fine is disgusting. He's just a repulsive. Randy Fine's a pig. He's a slob. He's a gross, disgusting thing. He's not even, as far as I'm concerned, Randy Fine isn't even human. It's because he would deny humanity to others. And anybody who denies humanity to other people, they are subhuman. Randy Fine denies that Palestinians are people. He denies that Muslims are people. And if you deny that Palestinians are people, Muslims are people, or anybody else are people, then guess what? You lose your people card. Randy Fine loses his people card. Well, he'd probably lose 2 or 3 of them because he's about the size of 2 or 3 people, but he loses his people card. And this is another part of the problem. When you say stuff like this, when you say stuff like, Randy Fine is subhuman, Randy Fine's a fat Jew, how do you get to those conclusions in the first place? Anybody ever asked that question? How do you get to those conclusions? Usually the questions of why would you say something like that? You're a horrible person. That all comes after the fact. And people just assume you just have these bigoted beliefs. But why do we get to this point anyway? How do we get to the point of saying, well, we should just ban Judaism then? Because of the assault on Islam and Christianity and the assault on the First Amendment. That's how we get there. That's a stress test. Does the First Amendment still exist? Does it still exist? I'm going to test it out. Does it still exist? Checking 1, 2, 3. Does it still exist? Because if I go to jail for saying that, then it doesn't exist. If people get demonetized or banned or attacked and go to jail for saying that, then it doesn't exist. How do we get to the point where Randy Fine is just disgusting subhuman? Because he denies the rights, he denies the human identity to non-Jews. I mean, think about it like this. When people say, if you're going for a job interview, you shouldn't speak poorly about your last employer. Or if you're going on a date, you shouldn't speak poorly about your last relationship, because that shows the new employer that, they're just one step away from being smeared in the same way, or a new relationship. If Randy Fine will say those things about Muslims and say those things about Palestinians, what is he going to say or do about you? What do you think he thinks about you? What do you think he thinks about Americans? If he's willing to sell the country out for a foreign country, what do you think he thinks about American citizens? He'll do it on video too. Vote for other members of Congress. Totally illegal. Totally treasonous. What do you think he'll do to you? If he'll assign one group of people to that category, he'll assign everybody to that category. That's just how it is. Let's listen to Israel Katz, Defense Minister of Israel, and what he had to say about Lebanon, which, of course, Randy Fine says, we're not bombing them. We're bombing Hezbollah. There's a difference. We're not bombing civilians, just Hezbollah.
The agreement on the separation of arenas is an important achievement led by the Prime Minister, and it allows us to act with force against Hezbollah according to an orderly plan based on 4 lines. The borderline includes the destruction of houses in the Lebanese frontline villages. Fortified positions line inside Lebanon, which has been expanded from 5 to 15 points. The net line, whose seizure was completed through the ground maneuver, and efforts are currently underway to expand it at additional points. And the Litani line, in which the IDF will maintain control as part of controlling the Litani area and preventing the infiltration of additional terrorists when residents return southward.
In other words, we get to kill civilians and destroy villages because that's where we draw the dividing lines. And anybody who resists is a terrorist. Kind of like those insurgents in Iraq, right? Let's listen to what Jonathan Pollard, the convicted spy who was flown back to Israel on the jet of the spouse of the person who gave Donald Trump all that money and called him the Messiah, would be the Adelsons, who went back to Israel and was given proper welcoming by Netanyahu. Here's Jonathan Pollard, who also had said we should nuke our enemies, and is a total psychopath.
They want me to do? No, what did they want me to do? They wanted me to sign a document implicating most of the American Jewish community's leadership in my activities. They wanted them implicated. It was a decapitation effort. And I noticed, Israel, that there were quite a few people on that list in front of me who were actively endorsing my execution at the time. But my father raised me never to Moser another Jew, never to betray another Jew. If it were in front of a kosher bed din, as my father said, that was one thing. But in front of the goyim, no.
You thought David Wilcock had a punchable face, someone that you wanted to slap across the face and watch his blonde hair go all over the place? This is Jonathan Pollard. I apologize to David Wilcock. Jonathan Pollard has the most slappable, punchable face on planet Earth. And Jonathan Pollard just said, this is the worst spy in American history. Stole our secrets, sold the country out. And because our government at the time knew, back in the 80s, that he was working, when he was caught, when he was working with the Israelis, he was working with our greatest ally, who was also spying on us and undermining our foreign policy. Jonathan Pollard, who wants to nuke all of his enemies, all of our enemies. Jonathan Pollard, the traitor who committed treason. Jonathan Pollard, the scumbag, the bald Jew. It's a Larry David reference. Bald Jew. The bald Jew, Jonathan Pollard, says that he was taught to never out another Jew, even though clearly it was Israeli intelligence and high-level Jews in the United States who were behind this espionage. And Jonathan Pollard, the only thing we can say to his credit, was probably the least involved in that espionage. He's the one that took the fall for it. Jonathan Pollard openly telling you about the nepotism. We don't turn in other Jews. We do our parts. Just a caricature. And Jonathan Pollard should have been executed because that's what we do to people that commit treason. He should have been put on a podium. He should have had a rope put around his neck. He should have had the charges read against him and the convictions read against him. We should have pulled the lever and watched his fucking Jew neck snap and his Jew body twitch at the end of that rope to let everybody else know, whether you're Jewish or anybody else, doesn't matter what your identity is, if you're a traitor to this country, if you commit treason, if you sell our secrets and undermine our government and our soldiers and our civilians, if you undermine our country, you get your neck snapped. But when you say that, he's advocating for killing Jews. How did we get there? We got there because a disgusting bald Jew sold our country out. That's how. Now, does that maybe make you reconsider history? Because like with Adolf Hitler, who for the record, I'm not a fan of because he worked with the Jews, I'm saying that if we are learning about all of these inconsistencies and lies today, and we're learning a perspective, we're gaining a perspective on some of this stuff, we're learning like, oh, wait, maybe people don't like Randy Fine because he's a traitor. Maybe people don't like Jonathan Pollard because he's a traitor. That's why they don't like him. Maybe Hitler didn't like Jews in Vienna because they did the same thing. Now, you don't have to agree with the sentiment or the rhetoric. Frankly, that's why I don't particularly like Stu Peters or a lot of these other people like Dan Bilzerian, because I don't like their rhetoric. They're basing it on Jews. I'm basing it on the Constitution. You're a traitor, you get your neck snapped. That's it. You're a traitor. Boom. Firing squad. Jonathan Pollard would probably make a nice lampshade. That's all I'm saying. He'd probably make a nice bar of soap. Sarcasm. Jonathan Pollard should have had his neck snapped. But you see how he paints it. They were trying to get me to turn on the other Jews, and my father said, never turn on a Jew. You don't turn on Jews. We do this to the Goyim. Jonathan Pollard sits there and tells you exactly what the truth is. If I point those things out, I'm an anti-Semite spreading blood libel. But Jonathan Pollard sits there and says, we're taught to never out a Jew, even if they're guilty, even if they're responsible. And these people were calling for my execution. And in the history books we read, Jonathan Pollard, an innocent Jew, was targeted by evil Americans who wanted to execute him. Why? Because he was a traitor. That's why. In the same way that when you read the history of, say, the Anti-Defamation League, you read the history of Leo Frank. Leo Frank was a rapist. Leo Frank was so guilty, so unbelievably guilty, that despite what the court ruled, the community got together of all denominations, all different affiliations, etc., and lynched him. That's how guilty the guy was. The public said, you know what? This guy is so guilty. He tried to blame his crime on a black guy too, by the way, which is just, par for the course. It's the blacks that did it. Listen here, whites. The blacks did it. The blacks did those horrible things. Go get them blacks. Ain't the blacks. I mean, they destroyed and gave blacks a false identity, as Thomas Sowell has, and many others have pointed out. But that the blacks aren't the issue. And I mean, ultimately, the Jews aren't the issue either. It's just corruption. I mean, if, again, Randy Fine was a constitutionalist, I got no problem with Randy Fine. but he's not. So I got a problem with him. Also have a problem with a bunch of other members of Congress who are not Jews, who are also not constitutionalists, who don't follow the rule of law, who mock and ridicule our country and sell us out to the highest bidder. Anyway, the point is Leo Frank was a factory manager in Atlanta. He was convicted of raping a 13-year-old girl named Mary Fagan. 13 years old. He raped her and he killed her. And he said, I didn't do any of this stuff. It was the N-word. The black guy did it. He was so guilty that the general public said, I don't care what the court said. We're getting this guy. And so the general public, they hunted him down and lynched him. Now, too bad the same thing didn't happen to Jonathan Pollard. They got him out of harm's way, just like the bin Laden family. They got him out of harm's way before the public could do anything about it. But this is precisely another example of your 1930s history. I mean, it was Leo Frank. This took place before that. This was in the United States in 1913. Same year as the Federal Reserve was established. Do you think that maybe when it becomes so obvious that everybody unites, Christians and Muslims, blacks and whites, everybody gets together. I'm not saying there were a bunch of Muslims in the case of Leo Frank. I'm just saying a bunch of people that were of various backgrounds, denominations, races, sexes, got together and said, this guy raped and murdered a little girl and then tried to blame black people for it. We're going to kill this guy because the courts let him off. Who do you think ran the courts? Who do you think ran the courts in all of these cases that you've seen where Jewish pedophiles and predators get off scot-free and go back to Israel, and that's where they're protected? The courts let him off. The general public gets together and says, you know what? No. And that is where we're at with Epstein. We're really close to that. We're close to that with Epstein. We're close to that with Randy Fine. And when that happens, I want you to document this. I want you to print this stuff. I want you to throw it on a hard drive. I want you to write it down. I want you to take pictures of it, take video of art. I want you to have the records of this. Because in 100 years, when this purge finally happens in the United States, in 100 years, some other poor country somewhere that comes to power, or maybe it's China, I don't know. They're going to teach them that the evil Americans, the evil white people of America, got together and ran the Jews out of the country. They were just there, minding their own business, and suddenly a mob of angry anti-Semites descended upon them and ripped them out of office and lynched them and hanged them and deported them from the country. And there won't be any context for why that happened. You know those stories where, like, say, a young girl, like Mary Fagan, like a young girl is raped, like a 15-year-old girl. Some guy's daughter is raped and murdered. And the courts, for whatever reason, they don't convict the person who did it. And then the father takes justice into his own hands and he goes and messes the guy up. And then the father goes to jail and the rapist gets off. Most people would say the father should probably be given an award, at the very least understood, and not go to jail. Maybe an award. That's where we are. Okay, the courts have let these people off, and now the father is going to go and beat the life out of these people because they have raped, they have tortured, they have murdered, they have stolen, they have undermined, they have done all the horrible things that they accuse everybody else of. This is what's going to happen. Mark my words. This is what's going to happen. I don't know when. It's not a prediction. It's just history. It's going to happen. And when it happens, document all of this stuff, because they're going to tell the next generation after that Randy Fine was minding his own business with his fat gut and his pimpled face. And people like Jonathan Pollard were minding his own business with his bald head and his big glasses. Looks like a fat Larry David. And they're going to tell you that people like Laura Loomer, minding her own business with her saw mask on, jigsaw mask on, and suddenly a mob of white supremacists descended off the mountain into the valley and murdered all these Jews and kicked them out of the country. And they'll tell you that Americans murdered 6 million Jews in the Holocaust. And then there's going to be somebody in 100 years from now, like us, who's going to say, well, actually, none of that happened. I have the records of it. And people are going to call them all these horrible names. You're an anti-Semite. You're a Jew hater. You deny the American Holocaust. And then what'll happen is it'll take several decades after that. And eventually that country, whatever that country is, will also rebel. And the cycle repeats. We know this because we have a long history of this. We have a history of this in virtually every, not virtually every, in every part of the world. Even arguably here in Japan in the case of the Tengu. We have this in every part of the freaking world. This has happened. From Lithuania to Spain to Germany multiple times to Russia, all the way across the Middle East, any country you can think of. This has happened everywhere. It's going to happen again. It's going to keep happening. And that is when you get to, and you come to the conclusion that, you know what? It's actually pretty amazing that the Germans didn't have a plan to execute every single Jew in Germany. It's actually quite shocking that they didn't have a plan to do that. Now, you might think that they did. You'd be wrong. There's no proof of that whatsoever. There was the Wannsee Conference in the early 40s in which they laid out the final solution, which was the deportation of Jews and work facilities and moving them into, well, it wasn't part of the Wannsee Conference. It was part of the Balfour Declaration and part of the Habarah Agreement from 10 plus years earlier, which was to move the Jews to Israel, but to just move them out of the Reich. That was the final solution. It's amazing the Germans didn't have a plan to exterminate the Jews. Because Mary Fagan is a really small example. Leo Frank is a really small example. Something like this has not happened in a country like America. Every country has a violent, bloody history. Most countries, in fact, all countries within human history that I'm aware of, have never had a population of people like so mixed and so passionate about, you know, their quote unquote rights, because that's just not been part of human history. And when that is awakened, they might not deport the Jews. We might just kill them in the streets in America. And that's not something that I'm advocating for. It's something that I'm saying is something to that level is going to happen. Before that happens, though, I am willing to bet a substantial sum of money that what is going to happen first is that there's going to be an attempt to co-opt that movement, an organic grassroots movement. There's going to be an attempt to co-opt that. And I think the Dan Bilzerians, whether he's real or not, are going to be part of that. The people like the guy that's running for the governor of Florida and many others, the people that are speaking out against this are going to be co-opted, or they already are part of this propaganda, to divert and to manipulate a justified grassroots movement against this evil, against this subversion. And they're going to mislead the public into targeting the wrong people, or they're going to sacrifice a few people like Randy Fine in the process to make you think you won. Yet the courts will still be controlled, the media will still be controlled, etc. They tell you Hitler went after the courts, went after the media. Yeah, because it was controlled by subversive anti-German elements. It's amazing if you read the Holocaust Encyclopedia. I read it for fun. And you read it and they're like, Hitler said things were anti-German. That's what Nazism was. Okay, what was anti-German? Well, he didn't like the porn. Okay. He didn't like the sexualizing of children. Okay. He didn't like the gender transitions at the Sexual Institute run by Magnus Hirschfeld, another fat Jew. Okay. I don't like transitioning children. I don't like porn given to kids. I don't like any of that stuff. So does that make me a Nazi? Yes. Okay. So is it worse to be a Nazi, or is it worse to be a child molester and a child mutilator? mean, if that's the definition of Nazi, I guess I'm a Nazi, although I'm not a National Socialist. I'm a constitutionalist, and I don't support Nazism. See, apparently the titles here are the only things that actually matter, because it's just like bite-sized little snippets. Did you call him an anti-Semite? Did you call him a fat Jew? Or, well, I should say just fat Jew, not anti-Semite. But even that, like, did you call someone anti-Semite? And we even try to control that conversation too. Like, free speech is just free speech. And don't try to associate free speech with violence, because saying someone's a fat slob is not hate speech. It's an observation. It's an identity. In the same way that you can call someone anorexic. Same way you can call someone too skinny. In fact, we seem to have that in our society. You know, don't fat shame, but you can skinny shame. You're too skinny, you're too thin, eat something, you're anorexic. We can do that in our society. Let's listen to what Benjamin Netanyahu had to say about Spain. They're left-wing, right? So we can't support them. I don't care what wing. It doesn't matter what wing the Spain is. This is what matters. Let's listen to what Netanyahu had to say. Israel will not. Let me go back. Israel will not remain silent in the face of those who attack us. Spain has defamed our heroes, the soldiers of the IDF, the most moral army in the world. Therefore, I've instructed today to remove Spain's representatives from the coordination center after Spain has chosen repeatedly to stand against Israel. Those who attack the state of Israel instead of terrorist regimes will not be our partners. Regarding the future of the region, I am not willing to tolerate this hypocrisy and hostility. I do not intend to allow any country to wage a diplomatic war against us without paying an immediate price. There's a lot wrong with what he said. He said that the IDF was the most moral military in the world. Militaries cannot, as far as I'm concerned, cannot ever be moral, because the nature of war itself is kind of immoral. And you, in order to survive, you have to do things that are immoral. You have to do things that are probably against your probably goes against things that you were taught as a kid, probably might go against your religious, conviction. That's why you have to convince soldiers that the enemies, are demons, or that they're monsters, or that they're heathens, because that's the only way that you can get humans to slaughter each other on such a grand scale. So I don't really think anybody can be moral in war, per se. I mean, maybe, but like generally speaking, I don't think that's a real thing. But then to claim, not only are you moral, you're the most moral, it's just another fairy tale. It's just another projection of insecurities, a projection of the fact that this is a very small group of people with a lot of wealth and a lot of influence, and this is how they control things. This is how they control people's perceptions. We're the most moral army, the most moral military in the world. Not only are most militaries not moral, to say that you're the most moral is just insane. And it's also posturing. It's like peacocking. Because if someone's that crazy, are you really going to fight them? That's why people put on war paint and chant, because, it intimidates the enemy. That's what this is. Because Spain said something about the IDF. Yet, on the other hand, Netanyahu can condemn American soldiers to death. No big deal. Why don't we hold the Israelis to the same standard? Why don't we say, you have lied to us about intel regarding the Iranian regime? You told us they didn't have the ability to shoot down planes. We sent in aircraft. They shot them down. You're culpable. You're guilty of that. You're responsible for those Americans being shot down. And if we're going to hold them to the same standards they held us and other people to, then we are cutting all diplomatic ties to the Israelis. That's it. I think it's as simple as that, too. I think it's as clear cut as that, too. Let's listen to what Randy Fine had to say here about America and free speech and the like. Here's Randy Fine speaking on an interview. I don't know what interview this was. I don't really pay attention to that. I got the clip. Let's listen to the clip from the Awesome Jew on X. That's their their name.
Fair enough. Okay, so next one. Are you Florida first, America first, or Israel first?
I believe this guy's also Jewish. So it's one Jew interviewing another Jew about how he's not anti-American.
Well, I would say I'm trying to think between Florida first and America first. I think I'm both. I'm a third generation Floridian. My grandfather came to Florida not long after he got off the boat. I did not spend most of my childhood here. I grew up in Kentucky. My because I believe the interests of Israel and America are largely the same. Israel fights the enemy over there, so we don't have to fight them over here. Why are we upset with Iran? Because Iran wants to build.
Israel fights the enemy over there, so we don't have to fight them over here. That's the same Iraq talking point. We have to fight the enemy over there, so we don't have to fight them over here. For those of you on the live stream, I noticed that you said, some people in the chat said that the audio wasn't coming through. I have no idea why it wasn't coming through. It was coming through on my board. It might actually be YouTube, because it's definitely coming through on the other channels. Some people said they could hear it. Some people said they couldn't. I don't know what the issue is, but at the very least, if you're watching the video, which is a very small number of people compared to the audio archive audience, you can at least read what he's saying. The same talking points.
An intercontinental ballistic missile that could get to the United States. They don't need them. They don't need them. They have missiles that can reach Israel. They have missiles that can reach Europe. Why do they need to build an intercontinental ballistic missile? Israel's enemies are our enemies. I often say the reason they hate Israel is because Israel is small and Israel is close to where they are. And so I believe standing with Israel stands with a country that largely shares the same values that we do. Does that mean I think we should put the interests of America?
Yes, pedophilia, homosexuality, terrorism, open borders, abortion. That's American values.
Over Israel? No, but I haven't seen an instance
Did
where
you say, does
that is
that
the case.
mean we should put the interest of America over Israel? No.
No, does that mean we should put the interest of Israel over America?
Okay, I want to make sure.
All right, if I misspoke, I apologize. But no, we should not. But I have yet to see an instance where standing with Israel is not a good thing for the United States as well.
Got it. So, you know, I think there was some.
I'm very sure that this guy is also Jewish. So once, just like TMZ, a Jewish network interviewing another Jewish guy, or interviewing something about a Jewish guy, and then another Jew interviewing another Jew. It's just all scripted nonsense. It's like, was that Rex Friedman or Lex Friedman? Same exact thing, interviewing Kanye West.
In a discussion maybe a year ago or something like that, where
that's how you control the conversation.
The level of criticism, where if somebody criticizes Israel, it can be seen as a anti-Semitic, individual. Where do you stand with people being able to criticize Israel?
I think it's fine. But here's where a form of anti-Semitism comes in. And this is actually one of the most insidious forms of anti-Semitism. When you criticize Israel for something that you don't criticize any other country for, when it only bothers you when Israel does it, that's anti-Semitism. And people conflate the two. So I actually ran the anti-Semitism bill here in Florida. It was one of my accomplishments. It's why Florida is the safest place in America to be Jewish. And our bill said, people would say, you said you can't criticize Israel. I said, no. First off, you can say anything you want. But when we defined anti-Semitism, we said if you're criticizing Israel in a way that you don't criticize other places. Let me give a great example. I think this is the best example. Think of all of the people that lost their minds for 2 years over the war in Gaza. Oh my God, they're killing all these civilians. Oh my God. And we can get into that. Lost their mind.
Just for the record here, there's a lot to say about that video, first of all, in the whole interview. You could do a whole show on. But just for the record here, what he's saying is, at least how I interpret it, you have a right to free speech, but you don't have a right to not having consequences to that free speech, which is like, yeah, that is true. The problem is he considers the term fat Jew to be an offense that deserves severe punishment. And in the same way that Benjamin Netanyahu says, well, the Spanish said, Spain said, hey, we don't like the IDF. Well, they're the most moral army in the world, the most moral military. So we're going to cut off all diplomatic ties. It's going to be harsh and severe. That's the consequence. That's how they respond to things they don't like. So if you call him a fat Jew, that's an imprisonable offense. Of course, speech has consequences. But he's also, once again, inverting reality because there's a double standard here. There is none of this happening with any other group of people, as far as I can tell. And when he says, well, what about Gaza? That's all people see. That's all people know about. Well, again, who puts that in the media? Jewish news outlets. So they're not Muslim. Time Magazine's not Muslim. CNN's not Muslim. Fox News isn't Muslim. So why are we concerned about it, or why are we told to support it? Because that's all that we see. And you're given the choice between you support what's happening in Gaza or you don't. You support what's happening in Iran or you don't. Most people weren't even seeing what was happening in Lebanon because Iran was taking all of the attention away from it. But you have an option, one or the other. You choose to support it or don't support it. If you support it, you're on the right team. You better support it the right way, but you're on the right team. If you don't support it, then you're identified as the enemy. And who puts that idea into the public awareness? The media. And who runs the media? People like Randy Fine. Do you get what I'm saying? It's all scripted. It's all part of the game. Most people don't even know what's going on in their own backyard. The only reason we know anything about what's happening in Gaza is because we're constantly showed it by people that are supposed to be politically in opposition to the people that are doing these things. They're not in political opposition. The liberals that hate Israel get most of their money from the Jews. They get most of their money from billionaire Jews. They get most of their money from the Israelis. Virtually every left-wing extremist liberal talking point is Jewish. Virtually all of it. Think about it. Abortion. Jews are the biggest supporters of abortion in the United States. Statistically, according to various polls, according to Jewish newspapers, Jews are the biggest supporters of abortion in the United States. They tend to be the biggest supporters of open borders. Jews are also the biggest supporters of pornography. They, in fact, own and run most of the pornography companies. Jews are some of the biggest backers of the slop that you see in the media, from Jerry Springer style stuff to Howard Stern to TMZ. Jews are also some of the biggest proponents of, if not the biggest proponents of overall, gay marriage. In fact, it was Jews that are responsible primarily for legalizing gay marriage. Jews are also responsible for changing obscenity laws in the United States. Liberals love to be obscene. Their fat guts out, their pierced face, yellow-green hair, or halfway shaved off. They're fat hanging out of their shirts, marching and protesting with pussy hats on. That's all liberal Jewish stuff. And they admit this. Jews are proud of it. The liberals are the biggest supporters of Israel. The idea that they're opposed to Israel is part of the ruse. It's part of the game, because it helps to identify other people that are against Israel or that have questions at the very least. Which is why, and you can see proof of this in the fact that people call me a liberal all the time. You're just one of those liberals that support Muslims. No, I don't support Muslims. I give Muslims a fair shake of the stick, as they say. I give Muslims a fair platform, just like I would give anybody else. In fact, I give the Talmud a fair analysis too, because I pointed out in the Talmud, yes, it does say that Jews are allowed to lie to non-Jews, but it explicitly says that in regard to maintaining the peace, which is something that Muslims teach, and I think maybe not so much Christians, but Muslims teach the same thing. That's what taqiyya is in Islam, so it's or Arabic. If I'm pronouncing that right, it's the same thing. So I give the Talmud a fair platform as well. But me not supporting Israel doesn't make me a liberal. I fundamentally disagree with all those liberal radical ideologies, which really I don't even know if they're liberal. I mean, Thomas Jefferson was a liberal. I'm more of like a Thomas Jefferson liberal. So it's about identifying opposition. It's basically Operation Trust in the Soviet Union. It's Operation 100 Flowers in communist China. It's QAnon in the 21st century. It's MAGA in the 21st century. You find and isolate the patriots, the people that love the country. You pervert and pollute their beliefs. You lead them astray, and you eliminate, eradicate, obliterate, annihilate the enemy. And the enemy is the people that would uphold the rule of law, the people that like to think they have morals and values, the people that would make, on average, better representatives because they understand maybe how economics works and could work to the benefit of the public, or because they understand how the law should be applied equally or whatever. And those are the enemies of the people that don't want to do those things. So don't call people a liberal. Liberalism is run by Jews. Social democracy is a Jewish invention. Why is that important? Because when Randy Fine is talking like this, on both sides of the equation, people like Randy Fine have the microphone. And they're interviewed by people like this guy or TMZ, whether they're being pressured or, like in this case, it's like TMZ. You said this, but what are you actually saying? It's all scripted to change the public's perception. When they might have a general idea of what's going on, you got to get them on that tube or on that phone to make sure that the public knows that, well, this is what they actually meant. Now, for those of you just joining us, we're going into hour number 3, the final hour of the show tonight. tstradio.info is the website. rdgable@yahoo.com is the email. I'm not intentionally neglecting the chat. I'm just, for the majority of the audience, it's audio only, so I don't want to spend too much time in the chat because the audio archive people will think like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? But I will acknowledge the chat. Now going into hour number 3, I want to thank you all for being here. I see Flux and Tim Curley, Amber Gedden, Mistos Dokos, Deborah, Arian, Luciferian, Hermit Ventures, Nathaniel Dove, Chris, Joe Ryder is here. There's a whole bunch of people in the chat. Thank you for joining us on the show tonight. And I know that you've all been speaking amongst yourselves and hopefully enjoying the show and getting something out of it. And I'm looking at it from time to time and trying to kind of reference things that are in the chat on the show that you're talking about. I see Imperium in the chat as well. Hello, Imperium 61. Leonard is there. Thank you for joining us on the show, Leonard. Thank you. I appreciate. I think Leonard was one of the first people here tonight. Thank you for supporting the show and being here with us. I see some people in the chat also asking or suggesting get a copy of one of my books. That would really help the show out. Protocols of Goyim, I'd recommend it, but I'd also recommend Occult Arcana, because that book is, that's my favorite book. That's probably the best book I've written. And to me, it's kind of neutral in a lot of ways, but you can get it all at tstradio.info. That's tstradio.info. Very simple website. Links are below. Find us on social media. Only X and Facebook are platforms that we use anymore, and you might even have a hard time finding us there. But go to the website, find the books there, and you can also subscribe to the ad-free show archive. This video show, for those of you who are new, is not the only archive or only part of the show that exists. This is just like a special thing that we do. I also want to thank those of you who have bought a book or you've subscribed. Thank you for supporting the show. If you listen to the free archive on Spreaker, Apple, Spotify, yes, I know there's ads in the show. You don't need to tell me that. I'm aware of it. Thank you for listening to them, because they pay us when you listen, or I think even when you skip through it. I don't know how it exactly works. But thank you for supporting the show one way or the other, and for being here with us Monday through Friday, especially sometimes when we do these longer, extended 3-hour shows, which I am unable, I'm incapable of doing a short overview. So you really have to listen to the whole show, because it might sound like we've gotten away from the main subject tonight, which is how many Catho-licks does it take to get to the center of banning Christianity? 1, 2, 3. It's not going to take many. Let the Catholics get targeted. Let the people that give platforms to the Catholics get targeted. Let them be destroyed. And then guess what's going to happen next? When Islam can't defend you, when Catholics can't defend you as like a barrier, well, then the root core of Christianity is going to be burned out. And they're going to rip the heart right out of it. They're going to ban your Bible, and they're going to ban you from practicing your religion because it is blasphemous and sacrilege to the Jews. That's the bottom line. Simple as that. That's why they made the Muslim your enemy, because, as Randy Fine said, I mean, that's Israel's enemies are your enemies. So they control us, so their enemies are your enemies. That means Islam is your enemy. Muslims know the number. It's not 6 million, but they know the number. They've got the number of these people, and that's why they hate the Muslims. It's shocking to me that someone just messaged me, I think in good faith, they messaged me last night and said, well, doesn't Israel have a right to defend themselves? It's like, really, that's your argument about Lebanon? They've been doing that since the 80s. I don't think Hezbollah was even around in the 80s. Israel has a right to defend themselves. We've got to fight them over there so we don't fight. Do you hear what you're saying? You listening to what you said? The words come out of your mouth. It's like Peter Griffin. I drift in and out. I don't really pay attention. It's important to know that the First Amendment applies to atheists, it applies to Christians, it applies to Muslims, it applies to Jews. And if you can argue for one being eliminated, you're arguing for all of them being eliminated. I don't have an issue with Randy Fine because he's Jewish. I have an issue with Randy Fine because, like Nancy Pelosi, he's a traitor. He's a scumbag. And he's not a fat Jew. He's an obese Jew. He's a slob. He's gross. He's a traitor. He's repulsive. He's disgusting. That's why I don't like Randy Fine. And that's just the, surface level stuff. Let's take it a step further. Let's look into more of the Catholic thing. Let's see what exactly is happening with the Catholics. And for the record, I'm going to put the call-in link into the chat room. And if you'd like to call in tonight, I actually asked some people I know who are Catholics. I asked them to come on the show and comment. And nobody I asked was free or seemed to be very interested in doing that. It might just be because maybe I didn't present the show in the right way. But I'd like to get your take if you are a Catholic. I'd like to get your take if you are, or maybe you were Catholic, what you think about this, what you think about what I'm presenting tonight. So let me put that into the chat room right now. And I don't know if I can, I don't think I can save it to the top. I think I'd have to go to YouTube and probably do it that way. I'd have to go to the actual YouTube stream. Yeah, I think I can do that. I can link it so it's at the very top of the chat. I'm guessing that's how it shows up for you. And you can I can reference it and you can click the link if it lets me do that. Can I do that? Put it in the chat, and I should be able to link it to the top. Yep, okay, I pinned it to the top, so you should be able to see it there at the top. The link to call into the show. Now, if you call in, please make sure that your video is turned off, you have decent audio, and I will bring you on at some point here to comment. Before we do that, though, let's go back to the internet, and let's look at some of the stuff that some of the videos, some of the comments that have been posted. First, though, let's get an idea of what we're talking about here in regard to Catholics. The Religious Liberty Commission, Carrie Prejean Bowler. I don't know this woman. I don't particularly like or dislike this woman. All I know is that this woman spoke her mind, expressed her view as a Catholic and as part of the Religious Liberty Commission, and then was fired from it because we don't have religious liberty in this country. Carrie Prejean Bowler, this was, of course, back in February, has been removed from the White House Religious Liberty Commission after Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who chairs the body, accused her of trying to hijack a hearing on anti-Semitism. She didn't actually try to hijack anything. She just said, as a Catholic, I refuse to be compelled to worship Israel. I refuse to support it. Like as a Catholic, I'm not a Zionist. I don't support Zionism. Here's what she said on social media when that had happened, when she was fired. President Trump officially removes me from the Religious Liberty Commission for exercising my religious liberty, which means that she and we don't have religious liberty. She says the only Catholic woman who opposes Zionism was removed as a prelude to the Iran war. Very smart woman. That's exactly what it was, in the same way that Charlie Kirk was taken out and his mentor was taken out on the same day they changed the age guidelines for the military. And now they're going to implement the mandatory draft registration. I think it's in December. So if you're 42 years old, you can be drafted to go fight for the Jews. This is the email, she says, that she received from the White House informing her that her position at the RLC was terminated. Dear Mrs. Bowler, on behalf of President Donald J. Trump, I am writing to inform you that your position as a member of the Religious Liberty Commission is terminated effective immediately. Thank you for your service. That's it. Simple as that. Thanks for your service. How many people have been fired in recent memory because of stuff like this? Joe Kent was fired because he said the Israelis dragged us into war. Same thing that's happening here. And she didn't even say that. She just said, they removed me because you can watch the video, because I had some comments about Israel that some Jews didn't like. And that literally is all that it is. And this goes back to what we played with Randy Fine. This is where the show starts to fold back in on itself and come together, and you can see the final product. That's why you have to listen to the whole show, because I'm very long-winded, as you can tell. Let's listen to one. I have several clips here, but let's listen to what one of the things she was talking about.
One last follow-up. Since we've mentioned Israel a total of 17 times, are you willing to condemn what Israel has done in Gaza?
No, because I unilaterally reject that it's not a genocide. The only genocide ever carried out was on October 7th when Hamas tried killing every man, woman, and child they could possibly find.
70,000 innocent civilians.
Which that, by the way, wouldn't even be genocide. If you're arguing that Hamas tried to kill every man, woman, and child they could find, that's not genocide. Genocide is attempting to exterminate a people entirely. Not just, I found a bunch of people at a music festival and I want to kill them all. That's not genocide.
Let me respond. So first of all,
you won't condemn that.
And Carrie,
just on the record.
He's already. Excuse me, as chair of the committee.
I think it's important we have this discussion.
I agree. I'm happy to answer.
And Carrie,
I think we'd be great friends.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer.
Carrie, we have had the discussion. Good questions, good answers. This is a commission on religious liberty. If there's another commission on this issue,
I don't know why we're talking about a foreign country.
Well, to be fair, you brought it up.
Okay,
you did.
At no point in my testimony did I mention Israel. I was very clear about American Jewry.
You did.
I did not mention Israel.
Okay. We'll talk about this later.
But that's objectively not true. I did not mention Israel.
This can be another discussion on another day.
You notice that this guy speaks just like Ben Shapiro because he's a carbon copy. They just cut these people out, cookie cutter, and they speak really fast and they repeat rhetoric and it makes them sound smart. But if you take that yarmulke off and you blow in this guy, he flies away in the wind because he's weak, he's pathetic, he has nothing to say, He's an agent of a foreign country. And it is important to talk about Israel, because if Israel is driving foreign policy, that's a much bigger thing than domestic policy. And we know they're controlling that. And we're not allowed to question Israel. And maybe some people want to question Israel because they're Catholic and they don't support it. Then it is important. This whole argument, well, this is about religious liberty. It's not about a foreign country. Well, it is, because there's a foreign country that has infiltrated our country, and they're manipulating our largely, Christian population into censoring themselves, into censoring Americans, into giving up their own religion at the behest of a foreign entity. So it is important to talk about that because it's at the center of the religious liberty issue, which goes back to the First Amendment. In fact, it's not just central. It's more than what even that implies. It is the root foundation, the root core of the issue, because most of this religious liberty discussion that we're having in America right now over can Muslims be Muslims, can Islam be banned, etc., it's coming out of the mouths of people like this. And this guy is not fat. He's a skinny Jew with a yarmulke on. You just want to knock it off their heads. It's just the most pompous, arrogant thing to put on your body. I have come to just dislike even the hat because it's only worn to signify superiority. It's like one of those Pilos caps. It has a very important meaning, like the Pope's hat, the mitre or mitre. It has it signifies something. Authority. You don't just wear it for religious purposes. You wear it because it signifies authority. If they were wearing it for religious purposes and religious purposes only, then they would shave their heads because they're like a monk, because there can be nothing above, their head but God. The fact that they leave their hair and then they put a hat on top of it, they don't worship God. They don't worship the same God as you do. They worship themselves. Look at this disgusting Jew. He's disgusting because he's a repulsive anti-American who hates free speech. That's why he's a repulsive Jew. And if he was a Muslim, I'd say he's a repulsive Muslim who hates free speech, or a repulsive Christian who hates free speech, like the president of the United States who's not even going to heaven in his own words. This is what matters, the First Amendment. And it does matter that we have conversations like this woman is trying to have, because religious liberty is being threatened by people like that guy.
Of tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians in Gaza and their universities' financial ties to that war. So I need to ask you, in a country built on religious liberty in the First Amendment, do you believe someone can stand firmly against anti-Semitism, including what you experienced, and at the same time condemn the mass killing of Palestinians in Gaza, or reject political Zionism, or not support the political state of Israel? Or do you believe that speaking out about what many Americans view as genocide in Gaza should be treated as anti-Semitic? Because in my view, the United States cannot and must not make loyalty to a particular theology about Israel a litmus test for protected speech or moral legitimacy.
What I'll say is that Natan Sharansky says there's three things.
Absolutely brilliant. That is exactly the point of tonight's show.
Things that you shouldn't do with Israel. You shouldn't delegitimize it, you shouldn't demonize it, and you shouldn't apply a double standard. If you can abide by those three things, you're not anti-Semitic.
So by not being a Zionist, does that make you an anti-Semite?
I don't think you need to be a Zionist to support a country that defends itself and is free and religious in a hostile neighborhood.
So is anti-Zionism anti-Semitism?
One second, Carrie.
Yes.
Yeah, but why is the neighborhood hostile? It's like if you moved into a neighborhood and your neighbors maybe were friendly at first and you just kind of went up to them and, pissed on their lawn and smashed the pie back in their face and just said, I hate all of you, I'm better than you. Blah. Oh, the neighbors don't like me. Well, it's because you took a dump in their yard and you kicked the dog next door and they offered to make you a casserole and you smashed it over their head. That's probably why they don't like you.
It is. It is.
Sorry. Yes.
I'm a Catholic. And Catholics do not embrace Zionism, just so you know. So are all Catholics anti-Semites, according to you?
As I said, anti-Zionism, by denying the right of the Jews to have their own state while not saying the same for any other peoples, that is a double standard, hypocrisy, and anti-Semitism.
So just to be clear, are Catholics anti-Semites?
Carrie, excuse me.
Oh, they cut her mic off. You're not allowed to speak.
I'm going to interrupt the discussion. Our committee is focused on religious liberty taken from all people. This is not the commission for that.
Right,
And
but we're
so
talking
you
about
were-
a foreign nation, so I want to be clear on what the definition of anti-Semitism is. If I don't support the political state of Israel, am I an anti-Semite? Yes or no?
They already answered, asked and answered.
According to you on the record, yes? I don't support the political state of Israel?
I don't personally label people, but what I'm saying is, if somebody states if somebody says they're an anti-Zionist, they are saying about themselves that they have a double standard and hypocrisy, and they're taking anti-Semitic positions.
It's so funny because by his own argument, if he's arguing that you shouldn't have a double standard, like you shouldn't condemn Israel only, isn't it assuming a lot that if someone says, I don't support Zionism, that they've never taken a similar stance about anything else? That's a big assumption. I've taken that stance against my own country. I don't like nation building. I didn't support and don't support what the United States did in Iraq, Libya, Syria, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Korea, or Japan for that matter. I don't agree with nation building. I don't agree with imperialist expansion. Neither did our founding fathers, for the most part. So I'm completely opposed to the U.S. doing those things. Turns out a lot of what the U.S. has done is also because of people that wear this hat. But that's beside the point. The point is, this rabbi is arguing that if you're anti-Zionist, you must be a hypocrite. Why? I'm not a hypocrite. I'm anti-Zionist, but I'm also anti-American expansion. I'm anti-American imperialism. I don't think we should take Greenland or Canada. Quite frankly, I think we should just leave things the way that they are and forget about it. But that's not really how the world works. The point is, what about, let's say, what if Syria or what if Lebanon or any of the surrounding countries, what if they wanted to expand into Israel? Are you denying them their right to exist? Are you denying the Lebanese the right to defend themselves against your bombardment? Because that ultimately really is what drives Hezbollah. That's really what drives Hamas, is you slaughtering their people. And it's the same propaganda we heard about Iraq, right? Well, you know, those Iraqis are terrorists. No, they were fathers protecting their children and their families. And we actually saw visual evidence of that with some of those leaks from WikiLeaks when we saw the helicopter and they were just playing, you know, Call of Duty and murdering journalists and people picking up their kids at school. So very, very clearly, this rabbi has the double standard. This is all psychology. And I'll admit, it's good. It makes you think. Well, really, it makes you not think because it seems too hard, too complicated. It seems logical at first until you break it down. Then you're like, well, this doesn't make any sense at all. You're assuming that I don't resist any, like if the United States does the same thing, I don't resist it. Why would I support if the U.S. does the same thing? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the U.S. should get rid of all their military bases in Japan. Funny thing is, I've got some listeners who either are deployed here or their family members are deployed here. And they said, you know what, even though that's the case, like I have family in Japan who are in the military who are, you know, stationed in Japan. I'm an advocate for getting them out of Japan. The only reason I want them to be in Japan, I had a listener tell me this. They said, the only reason I want my husband to be in Japan as a soldier is because I want to live in Japan. Otherwise, I think the U.S. should be out of Japan. I completely disagree with nation building in this capacity. So does that mean that I'm not an anti-Semite because I don't like that Israel's doing the same thing? Plus, Israel is a Nazi state anyway, and I don't support Nazism. So
And I don't mean that like they do the same thing the Nazis did. No, they're worse than the Nazis. They projected their crimes on the Nazis. They did the things that the Nazis were accused of doing, particularly the Bolsheviks in Russia. And then it was all projected back onto the Germans, and the Germans were held responsible for all that evil. And the Americans were let off the hook for helping some of the Jews, and they weren't held responsible for the war crimes they committed in Tokyo, among other places. Dresden, among other places, among like 68 other German cities and Japanese cities, etc., that they just firebombed and nuked and slaughtered hundreds of thousands of people overnight. Would they kill 100,000 people? It was like the worst air raid in U.S. or I think in world history when they bombed Tokyo. 100,000 people, not even military, just slaughtered them overnight. And the Jews made sure that the Americans were not held responsible for that. We just went after those evil Germans. Anyway, the point of all of this is, it is important to talk about Israel because they're controlling our foreign policy and our domestic policy, and Jews are being used as the metric by which to determine whether or not we should have free speech. So Carrie Prejean Bowler, that's a real American hero for asking these questions and getting fired from the Religious Liberty Commission for expressing her religious views.
They've brainwashed people, Christians and many other groups, to worship Israel. And like I said, I would rather die. I would rather die than worship Israel, a genocidal state that is committing genocide against innocent Palestinians. Yep.
Yeah.
It's wrong. And I reject that. And it feels so free, you guys. I honestly feel so free. I'm no longer in chains. Yes. I'm no longer in chains. And you know what? I wasn't. I continue to post and I continue to tell them. And I have the emails to prove it. I have the text to prove it. I have all the receipts. I reached out to many people on the commission and I said, hey, they're trying to silence me for my religious beliefs. What do you think about this?
Wouldn't that also make them anti-Catholic? Wouldn't they make them anti-Catholic? Wouldn't they make them anti-Gentile? Like it's okay to be anti-Catholic but not anti-Jewish, which is what the original term meant. I think you should be able to be anti-Catholic if you want, anti-Jewish if you want. I mean, I don't particularly like Catholics. I don't dislike them either. I just don't really have an opinion. I like this woman. I think she's a lot more real than Dan Bilzerian, if I'm being honest with you. I like her. I don't find her attractive, but I find her to be glowing with beauty because there's a spirit there that is rejecting what she is being forced and compelled and blackmailed and everything else to support. I think you're anti-Gentile. And it's also just a fallacy. Listen to this guy speak. Well, if you don't like Israel, it's like, well, then you don't like Zionism, then you have double standards because other people do it too. Isn't that like what a child argues? But everybody was doing it. Everybody was drinking the beer at the party. Everybody was throwing rocks off the bridge. Everybody was raping that girl in class. I had to do it, Mom. I had to do it, Dad. Everybody else was doing it. Well, you think because I did it, I should be held responsible? Other people did it too. Just like a childish, arrogant, bigoted thing to say. She stands up for herself, so she's more attractive, says Flux in the chat. Accurate. And that is how we should change our standards to meet that standard. People should be held up as being like more human when you stand up for all humans, which ironically is Israel. That's what the term means. You're a more attractive and more, no, I don't mean physically per se. I'm just saying it's better to be around those people. This is even more convoluted. Let's listen to this. This was at the Religious Liberty Commission too, I believe.
Do you think saying Christ is king is anti-Semitic?
No.
I'll rewind that. It was a little bit low in the volume, but do you think saying Christ is king is anti-Semitic?
Do you think saying Christ is king is anti-Semitic?
No. Christ is king. The phrase Christ is king has been, admittedly by many, co-opted for the purpose of identifying with a Groyper movement and putting the Jews in their proper place to show them that they are other than. I'm talking about how the phrase can be abused.
To say that,
you know when people say things like they say people, or you've probably seen that meme, right? Where there's like a dividing line and there's like some guy in a red shirt, guy in a blue shirt, and something like the blue shirt, you know, pushed so far to one side, or went so far to one extreme that, you know, when the red guy says like they're, you know, just there's everyday opinions, they seem extreme. It's not because the red guy moved anywhere on the spectrum. It's because the blue guy went so far in the other direction that now the red guy, who's just himself, is extreme. There's a big distance. It's not because the red guy moved, it's because the blue guy moved. Or you see the blue guy, you know, push somebody down, and then the red guy helps them to get up, and they say, "Hey, are you okay?" And the blue guy says, "Hey, why are you siding with the enemy?" If you elevate Jews to some special place in society, or any group of people for that matter, you elevate them to some special place in society, and you say they have special privileges, they get preferential treatment, they get better, you know, economic deals, you know, better, I don't know, well, there was one Jew on television arguing that Jews should get different mortgages, I think, mortgages or something than other non-Jews. It's like Jews should get preferential treatment. If that's where the bar is, so like here's everybody else, okay, and then the Jews are up here, they position themselves up here, we're better than you. And when you try to say, well, actually, you're just like the rest of us, they say that is lowering Jews to an inferior position. It's actually just leveling the playing field and balancing it out. In their mind, and in some other people's minds, it's lowering Jews to an inferior position because to align them with everybody else would mean that they're not special. They're just average, everyday people. And they don't agree with that because they think that they're chosen and deserve the preferential treatment. You see how that works? Jews up here at the top. You know, Jews are at, let's say, you know, to think, if you're not watching, you're just listening. Jews are 10. Everybody else is an average of 5. But when you lower the Jews to 5, there's no context for the fact that they were overvaluing themselves, and we're better, we're special, we're a 10 out of 10, not a 5 out of 10. So when you lower them, they're like, they're lowering us, they're belittling us. It's like, no, we're just lowering you to the level that everybody else is on. However, I'm willing to lower the Jews below the average of 5. Why? Because anybody who looks civilization in the face and takes a poop every day and says, I don't poop, I don't smell, I don't make mistakes, I'm better than all of you, and all of you are my slaves and have to do what I tell you to do. Well, not only are you not a 10, I'm thinking you're more of like a 2. Because anybody who does that and condemns the mass majority, 99.99% of the population, to inferiority, you have exposed yourself as a subhuman. And when you say that, Ryan said the Jews were subhuman. Now, anybody who does that to the mass majority of the public with no context and just says, well, I'm better, those people are inferior, anybody who does that has lowered themselves not just to the middle average. They've lowered themselves below that because they're acting in their superiority, in their ethno-supremacy. They believe they're superior when in reality, you're actually inferior to the rest of the public. Because see, in America at least, we believe that if you're Muslim, you're allowed to practice your faith. They've given you a false definition of Islam, of course, but you're allowed to practice your faith. If you're Jewish, you can practice your faith, but don't you dare use your Judaism, don't you dare use your nepotism to undermine other people's faiths. That's where we draw the line. You can say, well, we can't have these other religions. You can believe that, but don't you dare try to implement some kind of law or policy and override the First Amendment or repeal it. Not going to work. And when I say not going to happen, they say, oh my God, he hates Jews. No, I don't like when people fuck with the Constitution. I don't like when people make a mockery of my country. That's the problem. That's what makes you a patriot. Not just, well, Israel says this, so I'm America first if I support Israel. Like, what are you talking about? When you hear this from this woman about, like it is, the issue is over Israel. That's what's driving a lot of this religious bigotry. And then you get Carrie Boulder gets fired because of that. And people cheer for that. How many Catholics does it take to get to the center of banning Christianity? If you let the Catholics be attacked, if you let the Catholics be assaulted because, well, they're not our brand of Christianity, what you're going to do is you're going to get yourself banned. And so Tucker Carlson, although he's not strictly Catholic, he's another denomination. He speaks with Catholics and gives them a platform. Megyn Kelly's a strong Catholic. Candace Owens is an outspoken Catholic. Alex Jones is a big Christian. And when the president turns on all of these people because they say, like, maybe we shouldn't have war in Iran, it's not just an attack on like people that he used to support, which is what I think most assume that is. It's not just an attack on like some people's perception of what makes an American. It's an attack on the values those people have. And maybe you say, well, Alex doesn't have many values anymore. That might be so. That might be the case. I don't know, Alex, but I can say that it's motivated by religion because those people are some of the biggest proponents of religion, be it Catholic or Christianity in general. Catholics in particular are being targeted because, well, you just heard what Catholics think. You just heard, I'm not saying all Catholics think this, but you just heard what Catholics believe. And Catholics don't support Israel. So that's why Catholicism is the first domino to fall. That's why Catholicism is the first piece to be destroyed, the first line of defense against what is just directly just Christianity. People are wondering, why is Christianity being attacked? It must mean Jesus was the physical, true, literal Son of God. I got a different take. It's not because Jesus was the true, literal, physical Son of God. In fact, many of the verses in Matthew completely contradict that notion. It's because Jesus taught and led a movement against the Jewish leadership. And the Jews have not forgiven Jesus or his followers since that happened, which is why they said, put his blood on our children, crucify him, even though the Romans don't have any kind of reason to do that. And Pontius Pilate said they don't have a reason to do it. Now they still blame the Romans, and it's the Romans, the whites, even though Rome wasn't white, but it was the Romans, the whites, the Christians. They're all guilty and responsible. No, it was the Jews that crucified Jesus. It was the Romans didn't have a reason to crucify him. In fact, they didn't even crucify people for religious offenses anyway. There weren't a lot of religious offenses because most religions were accepted. They did the same thing in Rome that they're doing to the United States. And we need to remember, write it down, the First Amendment, equally for atheists as for everybody else. You better remember this. You better get this. You better write it down. If you'd like to call into the show tonight, I've put the link in the chat. We'll take calls here in just a moment. tstradio.info is the website. rdgable@yahoo.com is the email. I'll put the link in the chat again. Leave your video off. We'll take calls here, as I said, in just one moment. One last thing, though. Pete Hegseth, the psychopath, Deus Vult, Jerusalem Cross, alcoholic, mass murdering, holy war, crusader, psychopath. Hegseth. Pete Hegseth is a big fan of Doug Wilson. I don't know if you know who Doug Wilson is. Doug Wilson is like, I think he's a dispensationalist. Doug Wilson really does not like Catholics, though. Doug Wilson is a pretty big name. You probably know who Doug Wilson is. Let's listen to Doug Wilson in an interview, a pretty famous interview.
Let me give you a couple of very practical examples. Okay. Could Muslims be here? Live? Yes, they could be. Could they hold political office? No. Could Muslims gather together with their Muslim family and friends to pray to Allah? Yes. Right? Could you have a mosque? Yes. Could they have a minaret, a prayer tower that issues a public call to prayer? No, because the public spaces belong to Christ, right? We're a Christian nation. So church bells are okay. Church bells are okay, but a Muslim call to prayer in the public space would not be okay. Catholic church bells would be okay, right? Catholic church bells would be okay, but a parade in honor of the Virgin Mary, carrying an image of the Virgin Mary down Main Street, no, right? So
what about the
basically
Eucharist? What about the Eucharist? What about a Eucharistic procession?
That's a new one. I would say probably not. It would depend on what was being done around it, how it was being conducted. But basically, public displays of idolatry, what the Protestant foundation of the law would consider to be idolatry, would not be allowed. So you wouldn't have a Hindu procession with a Hindu god. You wouldn't have a procession of the Virgin Mary.
So, in other words, what I'm getting out of this is a Protestant theocracy. That seems to be what Doug Wilson wants. This is who Pete Hegseth goes to for spiritual advice. This is who Pete Hegseth listens to. And he wants to get rid of, or at least restrict, Catholicism. Which to me sounds like a mixture of two things. It sounds like a mixture of Christian radicalism, or in this case, perhaps Protestant radicalism, and Jewish ideology, which is using the Christians, pitting them against each other, and using them to invalidate other forms of Christianity, one step at a time. That's Doug Wilson. Doug Wilson's also the pastor who has no problem with pedophilia.
Well, I conducted the marriage ceremony, but I did do that. So, but I didn't set them up. I didn't arrange it for it. I didn't all the things you hear online that I did in that situation.
So why would you marry off a pedophile?
Because it was legal. He's a professing Christian. The woman he married understood his background, understood what she was getting into.
You get the point, I think. Apparently, it's more important to just be identified as the right kind of Christian than it is to actually live the lifestyle. So you can be a pedophile. That's okay as long as you're a Jew. You can be a pedophile so long as you are, the right kind of Christian. And this is similar, this Doug Wilson, Pete Hegseth thing is similar to J.D. Vance, the vice president, and his relationship with his mentor, Peter Thiel. It's also similar to J.D. Vance and his relationship to one Curtis Yarvin. Curtis Yarvin, who according to Curtis Yarvin, is plotting against the United States of America. How is he doing that? Well, he has an idea. His idea is the liquidation of democracy, the Constitution, and the rule of law. Just so we're clear, that's the vice president's political theorist kind of unofficial advisor, is advocating for the eradication of the U.S. Constitution. The vice president who's being positioned as the anti-war, the real pro-American guy. The eyeliner wearing fake Christian, the aliens are demons, piece of subhuman garbage. That's what J.D. Vance is. Because again, he's aligned himself with anti-human forces, anti-liberty forces. So yeah, he's a subhuman piece of garbage. And guess what? Even if he wasn't, in my view, I have a right to say that because of the First Amendment. I didn't call for anything bad to happen to J.D. Vance. I just think that he's a subhuman piece of garbage. And if it's just for the fact that I can say that and I have a right to say that, I'll continue to say it. Exercise it, use it, or lose it. This is what J.D. Vance and Curtis Yarvin want for the United States of America. His manifesto, an open letter to open-minded progressives. Real name Moldbug, which is just mold bug. It's par for the course. And he's a Jewish. It's the same story. He's another Jewish agent. He wants to liquidate the Constitution, liquidate what we call democracy, and liquidate the, quote, rule of law. And he wants to transfer the power to a CEO, someone like a Steve Jobs, who would transform the government into what he called a heavily armed, ultra-profitable corporation, which is basically what it is already, which would include the selling off of public schools, the destruction of all universities, the abolishment of all press, and the imprisonment of decivilized populations, ones that are like, hey, we don't support what you're doing, you go to jail. You get a car, you get ass raped in jail. You don't support Jewish supremacy. And guess who would be in control of all of this? It would be, well, in the long run, it would probably be like probably a supercomputer ultimately. But in the meantime, it's kind of like a theocracy. And he doesn't say it's necessarily a theocracy, but he does refer to theocracy. Yarvin, who is an atheist, well, he's an atheistic Jew like Karl Marx, who rejects God. He's not really interested in theocratic rule per se, but he advocates for creating different legal codes to govern different populations. So this is who the vice president gets like advice from. A Jew atheist who, by the way, refers to himself as an elf. He calls himself a dark elf whose job it is to seduce high elves or blue state elites by planting acorns of doubt in their high golden minds. Just like Peter Thiel's obsessed with Lord of the Rings. The archetypes of it and all that, which, yeah, Lord of the Rings is great. These people think it's real. He thinks he's a dark elf. So here you have a dark elf, Jewish atheist magician, literally, who is giving, or moldbug, who is giving the vice president his political platform, or you could say, I guess you could say, political advice. That's where J.D. Vance gets some of his philosophy from. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong about this. I'm pretty sure I'm not. I am pretty sure that Curtis Yarvin also was behind the Doge program, because in order to bring about this theocratic rule, he advocates for the undermining of the last bit of remaining faith in the current system. And we do that by exposing things that are really obvious, like the government wastes money. So people won't trust the government anymore. And they'll advocate, they'll demand, not advocate for, they'll demand that we change the system. It's not working. So we're going to need to replace the presidency. We're going to need to bring about like a fundamental change in how things work. We're going to have to get rid of the Constitution. Whether they're advocating for theocracy directly or they're advocating for the abolition of all religions, the end result is the same. And the end result is that we lose, our country. We lose, liberty, religious liberty, or any liberty. You lose one, you lose them all. That's why I say and do the things that I say and do. And unfortunately, quite frankly, I think that the general public is actually, I think, on average, quite retarded. And so, unfortunately, it's hard to have these conversations because, even like that Religious Liberty Commission thing I played, the idea that, Christ is king.
I mean, that in and of itself is really, as far as I'm concerned, a really stupid mantra for two reasons. Number one, it's stupid because Christ is a title that applies to Krishna. I can show you the Bhagavad Gita. I've got it right here, where there's a whole chapter on Christ consciousness, and that far predates the Bible. That's the first problem. The second problem is, although they position it as Christ as king is invoked to be kind of like a dog whistle to condemn Jews, which sure, it's like to some extent it is, but also now they've co-opted it so that when people say Christ is king, they mean like Jesus and God. And what did they say in the Bible? Well, I think Jesus said in Genesis, maybe I'd have to ask Marco Rubio or what was it, Ted Cruz, because he's an expert on the Bible. If you think Christ is king, they've co-opted it now. So it doesn't mean you don't like Jews or something. Now it means you love God, you're a Christian, and because Genesis said something, you have to support Israel because you love God, right? That's why they say Christ is king. So they'll say it's also anti-Semitic, but it's also, because they've co-opted it, a significant, mantra to advocate for the support of the state of Israel. This is all a theatrical production, folks. If you want to call into the show, now is your time to do it. I know we had some calls. A few people dropped off because I was long-winded, but I like to save the calls for the very end. If you'd like to call in, please do so now. We are live April 10th, 2026, Friday. Give us a call. Let us know what you think of the show tonight. In the meantime, tstradio.info. That's tstradio.info. rdgable@yahoo.com. Get a copy of one of my books if you'd like to support the show. That would be Protocols of Goyim, Occult Arcana, Liberty Shrugged. All those books, I think, are relevant to tonight's show. Digital copies as well as physical copies. I want to thank all of you for tuning in the chat and in the audio archive, whether that's the free one or the subscription one. Again, I encourage you to give us a call tonight and let us know what you think of the subject, especially if you're a Catholic. Let us know what you think of the show tonight. We will go to, I think there's a lot of text here. It looks like this caller's name is Cole. We'll go to Cole. Is that your name? Where are you calling from?
Wisconsin.
Well, hello in Wisconsin. Your name is Cole?
Yeah, it's Cole Cushman. I've emailed you or been on the chat before.
Oh, welcome
I think I've
to the...
probably listened to you for about seven years or so.
Well, Cole, what is your assessment of tonight's show?
Well, I would just like to, I mean, they're slightly off topic, but like I know your previous live was about, or maybe when I listened to you at your work and all that, one of them was about that Easter miracle, whatever, with the pilot. And I don't know if anyone involved in a lot of things, I don't know if I've heard this, but essentially that was taken from Top Gun Maverick. He was literally in Iran and he saved saved Goose's kid or whatever. I don't remember exactly. And he flew out of Iran, and I assume those are made by the same people who came up with a story about the Easter miracle. And I would just really like to get that out into the zeitgeist, I guess. And I
someone had emailed me, Cole. And I think we have a slight delay here. I'm sorry, but I think someone had emailed me last night and said that the Melania Trump speech about how she doesn't have any involvement with Epstein, a lot of it was a lot of the, like what she actually said verbatim was taken from 1984, like the text, like it's from the book, some of it, which would kind of align, if that's kind of align with what you're saying about the pilot.
Yeah, well, I'm saying it was in Iran or whatever. Like, it was a huge movie. We have the goldfish memory to the extent where no one remembers it. It was one of the last cultural phenomenons, really, was that movie. I don't remember how many years ago it was, but
it was 2022. And in fact, I went to see that in the theater twice. I actually liked that movie, but you're right. It was in Iran, and they were going to destroy uranium enrichment facility. Sounds similar.
The other thing I'd like to get out which I'm sure you've addressed over the years, and I'm not trying to say there's some grand overarching thing, or I'm not, but I feel there is at some level, whether it's an adversary spiritually or whatever. But the fact that our original capital is named after synagogue state, how?
Wait, what? Hold on a second. You broke up. What did you say? Our capital was named after what?
Our original capital, or for a while it was I'm going to go to the top of a hill here just a second. I'm in a very rural area. You hear me now?
Yes, please go ahead. Limit on time.
Well,
please hurry up a little bit. But yes, go ahead.
Yeah, the Philadelphia thing. Like, how long does this go back? Like our original capital is named after synagogue of Satan. That how is long? Well, what are your thoughts? I guess
in regard to Philadelphia.
Well, like this whole relationship goes back before Israel was founded. I feel like I don't know how to describe it, but we literally named, like, that's what is named in the book of Revelation, right? The synagogue of Satan, Philadelphia, and that's what our first capital is named. Like, basically, we were set up from the beginning. It feels this like fake revelation or whatever.
I don't personally buy that in regard to the United States, but I do think a lot of the misunderstandings, or what I call misunderstandings, I think a lot of it comes from the misunderstandings of Freemasonry and what Freemasonry teaches, and the idea that the Jews infiltrated Freemasonry and all. I think it's definitely a lengthy, show, and there's been a bunch of books written about that. Not something I could comment on in the short amount of time we have. I don't necessarily buy that angle, but I do hear what you're saying, and I think it ties into Masonry and the Jewish angle with that. Other than that, though, do you have anything else you'd like to add about the show? Are you Catholic or no? Not Catholic? Grew up Catholic?
Well, my mom was raised Catholic. She's having like this resurgence. I've basically kind of talked her out of it. It's been kind of interesting with I went to the Christ Mass one year and I had to explain, I think because you taught me it, to tell them that that's Christmas or whatever. It was interesting in the beginning of that sermon or whatever they call it. The guy says, we're going to search for the mysteries. But the thing I would like to maybe like promote, where I think everyone is so gung-ho, they don't really know. Like, to me, it appears the Old Testament, obviously it's not the same God, but they're like praying to a demon. I mean, there's so many weird things in the Old Testament. And I mean, I bring up stuff sometimes and people like, a lot of people don't have a concept of the three different Gospels, right? The three different versions of Jesus within their own text. The boy in the garden thing, it's very bizarre. Then to go into the Old Testament, I mean, you could go on all day. The 300 foreskins over the 200 foreskins to get the princess David did. I mean, there's just so many bizarre things. I guess just the general lack of awareness and all that, because the book is so vast. I think if people were more aware of that, they may not be so like this death cult dance or whatever's going on.
Well, whether you are a Catholic or not a Catholic, just as all listeners, this applies to the idea that Catholics or any other group of religious-minded people can be targeted, and anybody would support that because it's not their belief system. I mean, overall, you think that's dangerous? Because I'm pretty sure that's like very anti-American. That's kind of the foundation of the country.
Yeah, that's been to us with the whole, I was taught in school the founding fathers are not Christians, that's kind of been somehow diverted. I guess the other aspect that I think I'm not exactly sure you can vet at this, but there's some connection to the whole evangelical movement and the CIA. Apparently they did something in South American countries I've heard about to overthrow them with this or something. That might be something to look into because that's a huge part of the whole shebang. You know, like I have friends who are evangelicals.
It's weaponization of religion in general, but Christianity in particular. And why not when you have 62% of the population who just, without question, that's how they identify. It's pretty easy to manipulate people. We got another call, Cole. Thank you for calling.
Sure. I'm just glad to get through. I hope I sparked something. So I was all right. Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. People in the chat are talking about it. So good call, Cole. Thank you. And there's a lot Cole brought up we could talk about. We just don't really have enough time. Or we'll go into a fourth hour. Scott is on the line. It does not look like Scott is connected, though. And we had someone else on here that dropped off as well. We're doing this through StreamYard for the record, which is not an official call application. I just have to give out the link. So Cole, if you're there, or rather not Cole, excuse me, Scott, if you're there, I know Cole's there. We just let him go. If you're there, Scott, make sure your phone or your audio or something's connected. I can't add you otherwise. While I wait for Scott to do that, if he does, tstradio.info, again, rdgable@yahoo.com. Please subscribe if you have not done so yet. Please support the show by leaving us a review on Apple, get a copy of one of my books, etc. I do all the work. It really is all me doing this, and I wouldn't be able to do it without you. I don't have a team. I don't get paid to say or to do the things that I do, except from listeners like you. Please support the show if you've done that already. Thank you for supporting the show. If you did drop off the call, someone said they dropped off, jump back in real quick. We'll take your call before we're done here. And Scott, I see, Scott, you're in the call line, but I don't see a device connected, so I can't do anything about that, unfortunately. Otherwise, that is the show tonight. How many Catho-licks does it take to get to the center of banning Christianity? Well, I guess we'll see. How many Muslims does it take to get to the center? I guess it just any Muslim. Get rid of those Muslims. Yeah, like that won't turn bad for you as a Christian. Probably not a good idea. If you would like to get, I guess you could say, proof or links to any of the stuff that I talked about tonight. I know I showed it to you on the video stream, but for most of you in the audio, if you need a link or something, just email me and I'll send it over to you. Because sometimes stuff can be hard to find, and you never know what you can trust in terms of sources of information. Just email me, rdgable@yahoo.com. Unfortunately, I think we're out of time, so I apologize, Scott, and through the darkness in the chat, someone else who had called in. I gave the link out earlier tonight, but I didn't really go to the calls to the very end. So next week, Friday, we'll take calls, try to take them earlier in the show. So be ready for that next week, next Friday. I'm planning to do something that's maybe slightly more, I don't know, humorous. Like maybe we can do some super secret space program stuff, or some Starseed stuff, or some super soldier stuff, something along those lines, to get a good laugh. I know people have really been enjoying these types of shows, but sometimes I need a break from it as well. Tim Curley in the chat, thank you for promoting the Buy Me a Coffee and supporting the show. I really appreciate that. No, we do not take anything from YouTube, because YouTube takes 30% from that. Please go to Cash App. Please go to Buy Me a Coffee. Please go to the website. Stay safe, stay informed, stay healthy. As always, I will talk to you on the next broadcast. Have a great night.